Welcome back! Once again, friends, to what we all know, and if not love, but at least tolerate, as the history of rock and roll, in film and rock and roll. Or so I have chosen to call it. You, of course, may call it what you like. Now, this is a very special episode, not for the normal reasons that it's a holiday, that it's a horror episode, that is the second Misfits episode of October this year, and the third Misfits episode of all time when it comes to the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. No! It's an even more special episode beyond all those things. In this one, I'm incorporating the elements of an interview I did with a fella down in Texas named Jay Whitecotton. No, he is not some vicious plantation owner with fascistic leanings, as you might guess from his name if he was a comic book character. No, he's a comedian down in Texas, more specifically based around San Antonio, and we had a great 2.5-hour conversation that I will be chopping up and releasing likely on my YouTube channel in bits and pieces with some goofy and inappropriate images and slideshows attached to it, just so it's, fun to stare at while you listen to us yammer back and forth. Because we yammer a lot, and it goes on and on and on and on and on with no slowdowns, no stop in the momentum. And obviously, I have only so much storage space when it comes to uploading podcast episodes, so I can't just tack on 2.5 hours to this episode that's already going to be a few hours long for Halloween. But I can pull the parts that relate most directly to the thing, the beast, the awful mutant nightmare he created. I myself think that his whole mentality and his driving purpose and his ideas about how to do what he does is incredibly inspiring, because I am also a broke down piece of shit that just wants people to be free to do the things they want to do the way that they should do them that's most natural, and to stop searching for a non-existent brass ring, and to ignore the industry, as we could put in quotes, industry, around this, the weirdness that we all engage in as artistic and entertainment-oriented people. The idea that you have to be beholden to the patterns of the folks that have made a lot of money before you is just the kind of thing that's going to break you on that wheel eventually. You're going to die unfulfilled. You're going to be ruined, and you're going to be bled of all the fluids you have in your creative brain for the chance to beg for scraps at someone else's table that they're never going to invite you to. I say that as someone that has, as of this moment, no advertising on their podcast and is not monetized on YouTube. And I will gladly accept any money anyone wants to give me for anything that I do, and let you put your slimy ads all over anything I've created if that day ever comes, probably. But in the meantime, please send this podcast or others to your friends. If you think they would like it, please check the description for links on how to support with no money whatsoever, or a little money if you would like to contribute some. We've also got two cinematographic concerns to discuss. The Crimson Ghost today, Jesus balls. Let's say this. In a perfect alternate universe, the ongoing series from Republic Serials, The Crimson Ghost. But unfortunately, in this world in which I live, in the dimension in which I reside, it ended after only so many episodes. But at least they told the goddamn story and stopped. Today, of course, if that was picked up for, a streaming service, They would have had probably two series, and then right before the creators would start really making money on the third season, they would get dropped by, Hulu, Disney, Netflix, or whomever. But it wasn't these times, it was those times. I'll also talk about The Oblong Box, a Hammer horror film with Christopher Lee and Vincent Price that obviously influenced the lyrics of the song Die, Die, My Darling by the Misfits. And we are going to go deeper into Misfits history, I think, on this third episode than we have, or I have. I keep saying we. God damn it. If I die, please continue to be we, I suppose. Because I keep impulsively saying that, but it's just me and the unnamed legions of mutant rutabagas and marmosets that I've chained to various Apple IIe computers with primitive editing software and musical instruments that make this happen with me every month, multiple times. But all right, enough preamble. You're going to hear little tiny bits of Jay Whitecotton speaking to you throughout this episode. And then we're going to hear a lot of Misfit stuff, starting with the graveyard incident. Now, in the past episode, I did a lot of interpreting things on my own and giving some of my own opinions on how I felt about what I was reading or learning. And I think this time I want to be a little bit more straight to the source, a little bit more reference guy, library nerd, and really read from the words of the time, the interviews of the back in the old days. I feel like it's worth it to hear multiple perspectives of the same events, as we've done, in previous episodes with different bands, but especially the Misfits. I mean, I did it last year, and I didn't do as much of the straight reading from interviews on the previous episode number 2, but I think you'll understand that now that I've covered a good, 5 hours so far to 6 hours of Misfits history, if you take out the movie elements, the movie review stuff I did, that everything I read in this episode is relevant because it mentions another perspective on something we've already talked about, another mention of movie projects in the works, another mention of maybe Dave Vanian from The Damned being involved with the Misfits, things like that. And there's just so much documentation about the Misfits and their releases and the bands they play with and all this kind of stuff. I definitely don't want to just go and read a bunch of facts and go read a bunch of just release dates and numbers of pressings and blah, blah, blah. You can get a real feel for what a workhorse of a band they were when you do check out those details. How, even when they couldn't record as often as they wanted, they were putting out merch. They were putting out singles and EPs for their fans and really hooking up their fan club, their fiend club, with great, cool stuff. But also, it's always, always, always really important for me to give the listener of this show the perspective of journalists at the time and let you hear the language of the time, let you hear how this artist was sort of received or interpreted by different sources. And in this case, very enthusiastically, I would say, by most of these young punks writing about this badass band, but they still have their own biases and they still have their own take on it, depending on what part of the country they live in, or if they're in the UK, or what kind of bands they personally like as much or more than the Misfits, or less than the Misfits. There'll be a few jabs at some other bands, maybe here and there, and I hope you like it. Previous episodes, like some Guns N' Roses ones I did, we've covered multiple accounts of the same violent episode or almost violent episode with Kurt Cobain. We've done different perspectives on the same violent episode with the LA Cops in the Go-Go's episodes, one of the most infamous punk rock busts of the early scene then, at a big theater kind of show with tons and tons of bands and tons of teenagers that got, intimidated and brutalized. in various forms: psychological, emotional, physical. We've covered multiple accounts of what supposedly happened when the Misfits beat up Motley Crue, or in reality, they yelled at Vince Neil and chased him out of the Whiskey A Go-Go, or all the way down the street. But I think Glenn said it wasn't down the street. And also multiple accounts of the incident, if you want to call it that, when Fear appeared on Saturday Night Live on Halloween with good old Dr. Loomis himself, Donald Pleasance, hosting. And today's no exception. Let's talk about the New Orleans, Louisiana graveyard bust. Newspaper clipping with a headline, "Punk rock musicians arrested in cemetery." 4 members of a punk rock group and 14 of their fans who claimed to be looking for the tomb of a voodoo queen were arrested early Monday morning at a downtown cemetery, police said. At the time of their arrest at St. Louis Cemetery No. 2, the members of the band called the Misfits were still wearing makeup, including dramatic facial painting, and one woman wore a black dress, fishnet hose, and chains, said Carlos Diaz of Migtari, who was one of those arrested. What? One of those arrested was describing the black dress and fishnet hose and chains to the person who's writing the article? Diaz said that the musicians who are based in New Jersey were looking for above-ground graves, including the tomb of voodoo queen Marie Laveau. But according to tradition, she is buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. 15 of those arrested, including members of the Misfits, were adults and were booked with criminal trespass. They are free on $75 bond until their arraignment at noon Tuesday before Municipal Judge Joseph R. Bossetta. 3 16-year-olds, a girl and 2 boys, were turned over to juvenile authorities. Diaz said the Misfits had gone to St. Louis Cemetery No. 2 after finishing a concert. About 3:45 a.m., police said neighbors near the cemetery complained to authorities about noise, and police arrived. Police said they found the 2 juvenile boys wearing T-shirts displaying skeletons and the word Necros, the name of the Misfits opening act. Diaz claimed police hit one of the women, but that allegation was not substantiated. A Misfits album, The Misfits Walk Among Us, features such songs as 20 Eyes, All Hell Breaks Loose, I Turned Into a Martian, Night of the Living Dead, Brain Eaters, Violent World, and Mommy, Can I Go Out and Kill Somebody? The album also features an offer to buy a Misfits t-shirt that shows President Kennedy at the moment of his assassination. Misfits timeline says 10/17/1982, after their show at Tupelo's in New Orleans, Misfits and the Necros went to a nearby graveyard to try to obtain a skull from one of the above-ground crypts. All 4 members of the Misfits, along with several fans, were arrested and accused of grave robbing. Although they were supposed to appear in court the next day, Misfits manager Rocky Caiafa bailed them out of jail, and they drove to Florida for the next show. The Necros missed the show in Florida 2 days later due to car trouble, and not because they were in jail in New Orleans, as incorrectly reported in FLA Decay No. 5. Let's read the interview in FLA Decay 1982 on the 19th of October. Finders Lounge, Tuesday, Misfits. This was supposed to be a formal interview, but due to circumstances beyond my control, it turned into a brief post-show chat. So this will be more of a review than an interview. Oh, well. At first glance, one might think the Misfits would be classified under that old age expression, 4 guys you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. Actually, they are all very nice fellows. Now you're getting it firsthand, remember. Glenn Danzig, the vocalist, was most friendly and cooperative in the chat we had. Glenn's a very accomplished musician. I can play everything, he says with a nonchalant tinge of pride. And that nonchalant tinge was in, with an exclamation point at the end of it. So I don't know exactly what they're trying to convey. Claiming responsibility for all, that's all caps, the songs. For those of you who couldn't make out the words, that being all of you, they are all about ugly monsters and mad scientists and vampires and homicidal maniacs. They have a strict no politics attitude. If you want politics, go talk to the governor or someone, says Danzig. Where did the image come from? One might ask, and I did. It just happened, he said. Jerry Only and I met in New York about 4 or 5 years ago, And we found we had the same interests, not only in music, but in all the lore that goes along with our show. We then started a band, and it just stuck. I can see that. The Misfits have a single out called Beware, and my sources tell me that it's excellent. Also, their latest album, Walk Among Us, deserves a listen. And now for anyone who missed the show, shame on you. I shouldn't even tell you about it, just on principle. You've probably heard about it already. Chris, it seems like it was a year ago. But I will anyway. I don't know who Chris is, sorry. But I guess it's my duty. Ha! By the way, side note on the Beware release, that was a little two-sider EP, 12-inch. Side one was Moyar 138 with Bullet, Hollywood Babylon, and Attitude, and then Horror Business, Teenagers from Mars, and Last Caress. Let's see, pressing January 1980 in Cherry Red on Plan 9. 3,120 copies, released in the UK. Some of them were sold through the Fiend Club. The sessions were January 1978, January 1979, and September 1979. Notes about this on Misfits Central say that it was supposed to be ready to promote a UK tour of 1979, but the record sleeve hadn't been finished by the time they arrived in the UK. In fact, Glenn came up with the title and scribbled it on a piece of paper, as can be seen on the cover, after seeing signs that said, "Beware, Bollards," during the tour of England. The EP was finally released after the Misfits returned to the United States. Many discographies list the pressing of the EP at 15,000 copies, but in 2002, an employee of Cherry Records disclosed that the label ordered 3,000 to be produced. With a slight overrun, the total pressing came to 3,120. Many different bootlegs for this release exist. Please see bootlegs section for details. And bollards are these like pegs, like these big, I don't know what you call them, these big metal or possibly in some cases concrete posts that stick up out of the ground. Originally referred to as a post on a ship or quay used for mooring boats, but they are now short posts used to create a protective or architectural perimeter, basically to stop you from getting plowed and plowing into some important building or other. Back to the interview. Let's see. Their power was overwhelming, or should I say their volume. Room's too small, says Danzig. We've got 4 more cabs in the truck, speaker cabinets. The visuals were mesmerizing. Danzig literally stretching his vocal cords for every word, down on his knees most of the time, singing every word at the audience, trying to involve them as much as possible. Doyle, a tall, muscular, primitive-looking creature, hunched over his guitar like a wounded little animal, rarely letting a split second of silence creep out of his amp, before, after, and during songs. Robo, recently recruited from Black Flag, as I'm sure you already know, pounded out precise meter, despite the fuck-ups from not quite knowing the songs yet. All the time sustaining the most intense, almost frightening look on his face. And of course, everyone's favorite, Jerry Only on bass. Rumor has it that he threatened anyone who attempted any more stage dives. Probably would have just bitten off a limb or two. One couldn't help but be reminded of a hardcore Gene Simmons. Come on now, you know who Gene Simmons is. A huge, frightening-looking person. The makeup helped. Who seemed to be perpetually angry on stage. Either that or he was just trying to scare someone. I couldn't really decide. But on either count, he succeeded. The show was most entertaining from both a slammer's point of view and a watcher's point of view. I happen to believe that you don't have to slam to prove you're not gay. Love it. Necros, an excellent band, according to Danzig, failed to show due to circumstances that were not beyond their control. It seems the combination of the two bands' post-mortem fetish was just too much for them, so they decided to dig up a few skulls from a graveyard before the show. Needless to say, they got caught. Remember, this is firsthand. The Misfits had bail, and the Necros didn't. All caps. Jesus Christ, these guys are for real. Exclamation, 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 exclamation. All of them are obsessed with life beyond the crypt and all the good stuff. I suppose being old horror flick fanatics has something to do with it. Blood Feast, one of Danzig's favorite movies, is now the first of 2. Blood Feast 2 is now in the works, and the soundtrack will be blessed by the writing and playing talents of, you guessed it, the Misfits. The film is coming out of California, where else, and should be ready this summer or thereabouts, so keep an eye out for it. And, of course, they will be recording again in the future. My guess is that there might be a soundtrack to the film available soon. Danzig also promised me that they will definitely visit Florida again sometime in the near future. Danzig has a play everywhere policy that I find rather noble. There's fuck all money in it, but I love it, he says with a broad smile. Check out their records if you haven't already. And don't miss them next time if you missed them this time. While I'm here and you're reading this, I would like to thank Saul at Finders for the good booking and David Camp. He insists that he doesn't deserve credit, the modest guy. And Saul again for bringing us UK subs in January. Look on the back cover, stupid. Don't miss that. Whatever you do, bye, Mike. So yet another review/interview that mentions an upcoming film involving the Misfits or their music. Let's see. Let's get back to another New Orleans newspaper from October 1982 that says, Cops hex voodoo punkers. New Orleans, UPI. 7 punk rock music fans see the numbers are already different, looking for the tomb of a voodoo queen and arrested for trespassing have filed complaints. Oh, these are the ones that filed complaints. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Not everyone that was arrested. Against city police, a police spokesman declined comment on the case Sunday, pending results of an internal investigation. Police arrested 18 people, including members of the punk band The Misfits. Police said several members of the group carried chains, and many of the women sported bald heads or mohawk haircuts. A 16-year-old girl arrested at the cemetery filed a false arrest and battery complaint, claiming an officer struck her in the face with a flashlight when she refused to say whether she was male or female. Carlos Diaz, 27, of Metairie, Louisiana, told police, okay, so here's our eyewitness that was referenced in the previous newspaper clipping. Told police the group went to the cemetery to find the tomb of legendary voodoo queen Marie Laveau. I'm sorry if that's your last name and I'm screwing it up. Following a performance by the band, he said they looked through the cemetery gates but had not entered the grounds when they were arrested. Now, I went back through my old files from last year's Misfits episode number 1, and from the way I had labeled all the different segments, I didn't see anything that was read straight out of the James Green Jr. book about this same incident. So I am going to take some of the text straight from that. If I already did cover some of this a year ago, I apologize, but I think because I've set it up with all these other accounts, I might as well do the present day definitive reconnoitering of it, even if it is a duplication of some of the details you might have heard a year ago. As pedestrian as their lives in Lodi seemed, on the road, the line between reality and ghoulish cartooning was increasingly blurred for the Misfits. No incident better exemplifies this than the band's arrest for criminal trespassing in a New Orleans cemetery in the middle of their Evil Live tour, undertaken to support the forthcoming raucous concert EP of the same name on October 17, 1982. Following a lively gig at Tupelo's, marked by the backstage antics of 2 strippers from Atlanta named Poison and Venom, who repeatedly placed Robo's drumsticks in their vaginas, the Misfits journeyed with approximately 30 hangers-on, including the strippers and support band The Necros, to one of the city's historical cemeteries, as many first-time visitors to New Orleans are wont to do. The band members joked as they entered St. Louis Cemetery No. 2 sometime after midnight that they were on the search for some stray bones and the tomb of a 19th century voodoo figurehead, Marie Laveau. A hairdresser of mixed ethnicity, Laveau was believed to retain incredible psychic powers and inspired an early 1970s Marvel Comics character of the same name. She's actually buried in neighboring St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. I think there's because there's so many connections with comic books and the Misfits and wrestling, I've got to believe that the comics character, or maybe this story, inspired Total Nonstop Action Wrestling's Roxy Laveau, although spelled a bit differently in the last name. And I only know who that person is because of reviews I've seen on oswreview.com. I've never even seen any of the matches on TNA Wrestling. Thank you for that name, shit stain. Mr. Vince Russo, you douchebag. Let's see. The residents of a housing project near the graveyard were alarmed by the racket the punk rockers were making and immediately called authorities. Tag along Mike IX, or 9 Williams, who's the singer from I Hate God, who I've seen live. I just don't know how people say his name. I don't hang out with him. I don't know enough fans of I Hate God who have ever used his name in conversation casually, so I apologize if it's Mike X Williams. I'm going to say Mike X Williams from now on in my life, not just this episode. Let's see. He was just 15 at the time and remembers the melee that ensued. We were there for what felt like half an hour, but it was probably closer to 10 or 15 minutes before the cops surrounded the place, says Williams. We saw the patrol cruiser lights and the search lights and people scattered everywhere trying to get to their cars. I just happened to end up at the edge of the cemetery where the cop cars were. That's when they nabbed me, and then I saw them walking the Misfits over one by one, Glenn, then Jerry, and so on, in handcuffs. 18 people total were arrested, discounting the Necros, who managed to convince the earliest arriving police unit that they weren't with the trespassing party. So that's different than, I think, 2 accounts that we've read so far. But only 15 were of age and could legally be charged. Williams recalls the arresting officers as complete assholes who made a spectacle out of hauling to the station this cadre of menacing-looking punks, harassing them at every step of the way. They took stuff I had out of my pockets and just balled it up and threw it away. They were taking everyone's wallets and dumping them out. At one point, a mohawked teenage female in the party was smashed in the face with a cop's mag light after she refused to answer the question, "Are you a girl or a boy?" While Williams and the other 2 underage arrestees were eventually bailed out by one of their parents, the Misfits spent the night in jail. Next morning, Misfits were released on bail courtesy of Ken Kayaffa, but they didn't stick around for their scheduled arraignment. The band soldiered on to Florida for their next scheduled tour date. Meanwhile, the New Orleans Times-Picayune reported the incident under the headline, "Punk Rock Musicians Arrested in Cemetery." The story made sure to note the Misfits wore dramatic facial painting. And their album refers to so anyway, it's all the stuff that we read from the quotes previously. A month later, Glenn, Jerry, Doyle, and Robo returned to New Orleans for their rescheduled court appearance. Scolded by the judge, the Misfits were basically told to stay out of the Big Easy and paid a fine of a few $100s. Here's an extra shitty thing the cops did. Instead of, towing their van and putting it up somewhere secure, which, I mean, when it happens to most people, it's actually very inconvenient and expensive. But in this case, they left it there where it was in front of the cemetery or near the cemetery with doors open for anyone to come along and take stuff. Somehow their music equipment was still available. It was still in the van after they got out of jail the day after and got back to the van. Someone, Mr. Green Jr. implies perhaps the cops themselves, did steal a set of weights that they had brought on tour to stay in shape. With, for those of you that hate when people end a sentence with a preposition. To stay in shape with.
We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves.
But I think when we push ourselves more onto people's lives, trying to stay constantly relevant and compete with all the other distractions, we're limiting and actually thinning our own points of views and voices. So when I put it out there, it's like, hey, I think I'll do podcasts, and I promise that I'll even show up for this. I meant it in that usually I would just send other people to play me on podcasts. No, they would be me. They would just whoever it was. I've sent black dudes, black women, white women, whatever. Just people with crazy people. I have a crazy Canadian producer friend who I sit on Kevin Brennan when I think I was getting roped into some stupid fucking podcast. It's what I think. Well, yeah, the thing is like I enjoy any medium where you can speak for real about how you feel about things, because I think that's important to if you're trying to generate interest from the general audience, you should probably present yourselves in as accurate as light as possible. And what I've noticed is that most podcasts are no longer podcasts in the spirit where you get that green room talk, because everybody is so careful and guarded. And maybe that's because, people like Shane Gillis is losing his job to Saturday Night Live. So to me, the podcast medium is no longer doing what it was supposed to do, which was give you the behind the scenes look. Now it's just another way for sociopaths to present themselves to suckers and lonely people who are desperate to project familiarity and human. I don't know where this is going, but I love your podcast. I love your podcast. That's what I'm saying. I was like, listen, I don't listen to a lot of things because I'm writing, creating, or working and reading and shit. But like when I poured through your stuff, I was like, this is the guy that understands. He cares about his subject matter. He cares about the show. He cares about someone listening to it, and he puts in so much work that you can't help but appreciate it. To me, it just seemed like, oh, this guy comes from the Dan Carlin school of podcasting.
Okay, now I'm very excited because I get to finally talk about the Crimson Ghost. Oh, I started watching this about a year ago or more, probably more. I was probably doing it in preparation for the first Misfits episode and realized I had too many movies I had to cover, and I just was so blown away by what I could find on this. I for those that don't know, the Crimson Ghost is the fiend, is the skull on every Misfits pizza merchandise and most of their releases that you see, the image that is. And the original character was actually a person in a costume that would go around in short film stories. They called them serials back then, Serials, and it was produced by Republic Pictures. Republic serials are one of the things most often named by George Lucas and Steven Spielberg as inspirations for projects of theirs like Indiana Jones. The high octane adventure of a sort of a rough and tumble guy, and there's a dame involved somewhere maybe, and that kind of a thing that would leave you hanging on the edge of your seat. Buck Rogers was another. I don't know if Buck Rogers was Republic or not. I know that I take it back. I'm sorry, not Buck Rogers. Flash Gordon. Apologies. So Flash Gordon, big influence on Star Wars, and then other Republic serials, big influences on Indiana Jones, and even like a country superstar like Gene Autry, who was like the biggest country star in the 30s. Like he was selling his radio show. He was selling little guitars with his name on it and all kinds of merchandise and doing plugs for various, products he was repping on the radio. But he did a series called The Phantom Empire in 1935. It's like Western musical science fiction adventure serial. So this is going to be a tangent, but this is just to set up, like, this is how widely varied the whole sort of genre could have been, or was at the time. It could be, I guess is what I was trying to say. Gene Autry, singing cowboy, he discovers a place called Murania, which is an underground kingdom. I don't know how far below the surface of the Earth's life. I forget. They touch on this in the Ken Burns country music documentary. Check it out if you're into any of that kind of stuff. I've watched the whole thing a couple of different times in the last few years. The queen of Murania sends her entire army after Gene Autry, the singing cowboy, to stop him from getting back home to tell the surface people about the existence of her secret empire. So there's like a conspiracy against the queen, which sort of complicates things enough to allow them to stretch this very thin sort of premise out across 12 parts. So Gene Autry knows the plans about this rebellion against the Queen, but he's also in danger from the surface people who will try to get a hold of the valuable radium in Murania, the unobtainium of the time, if you will. Although we have radium, of course, on the surface world. But every single time he gets back to the surface to do his show and live happily ever after for a little while before he has to go back down there. I haven't seen them. I don't know. But, you got this, you got stuff, you got like Tarzan stories, cowboy stories probably too. I just know that my dad told me when he was young, he and his friends would go, pick up aluminum cans and glass bottles from soda pops and stuff, take them somewhere to trade in for cash money, some nickels and dimes and whatever, and somewhere between 25 and 50 cents, I think is what it would take to go to the movie house on a Saturday or a Sunday for an entire day's worth of entertainment for all these kids in the neighborhood. And you would go in, watch newsreels, watch cartoons, watch a couple of serials like this that would be, less than 30 minutes a piece, maybe 10 minutes a piece, something like that. And then you'd get a double feature. I mean, how amazing is that? What a great life. I would do that now. I would do that now every single weekend at the age of 44. Can someone make this happen in the town where I live, please? Could I please, or could I just get rich and make this happen? Jeez. So with all that said and all that context, this next point I want to make is I'm very insistent about it. You can find every episode of The Crimson Ghost on YouTube in one big block. I highly recommend, for the sake of convenience, finding that link. I might include it in this description, but I don't know who knows. When it comes to YouTube stuff, it can come and go or get taken down all the time. And then it pops back up somewhere else or in the same account under a different link. And I don't want to share a bunch of broken links that, you can't watch a year and a half, 2 years, 5 years later. If I'm still alive in 5 years to keep paying the money to keep this up. Imagine if I'm 5 years from now, will I still have stuff to talk? I assume I would just pay for the hosting to keep it up and keep my whatever I think of as my legacy alive out of vanity. But maybe maybe I'll find enough movies to talk about and enough bands to talk about, or the same bands over and over again. Wouldn't it be exciting to find out? No, probably not. That's going to take 5 years. Point I was going to make was find the link for the whole thing together, because it was put together in one, I think like a TV show release, or it was put on TV as one big feature. And I think that big feature, as it was edited together, was later released probably on home videos and stuff, officially. But you don't want to watch it all at once. I recommend, if you can make yourself stop at the end of every episode and go do something else, do that. Because that's what you had to do if you were an audience member. You had to come back to the theater when there was another movie playing to see the next installment of The Crimson Ghost or Flash Gordon or, whatever, Gene Autry versus the Moon Men and Underground and other serials as they would kind of come and go. So and I say that not because you should just deny yourself the fun, but there's a formula there. Like every episode is structured exactly the same way. So if you watch too many in a row, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen next. But boy, is it worth it to check this thing out, because it is high energy stuff, because there's such a small window of time to sort of get the audience in on, hey, if you don't already know, here's the premise. Here's your main character. Here's what they're up against. And then the Crimson Ghost shows up and is really freaky and then tries to get away with the newest element of the Crimson Ghost's caper. And to get into the details of the series, I am going to read straight from a link that I'm putting in the description, because of all the links I found online about the Crimson Ghost, whether it's IMDb or Wikipedia or various little sort of attempts at punk rock blogging tie-ins to explain this, Mark Voger's website, markvoger.com, has the most detailed reference. and it is clearly written with lots of enthusiasm and love. So the title is Coolest Villain Ever. Fans of the Misfits will take one look at the Crimson Ghost cereal and say, hey, they ripped off the Misfits. Actually, it was the other way around. I think that was... Okay, Mark. How is that going to happen, Mark? The only time they're going to see the Crimson Ghost is in modern day is the Misfits logos, unless they find black and white footage of Crimson Ghost on YouTube, and then clearly they will know that it's black and white. Actually, I've seen some of it has been colorized, and to that point, actually, the first time I ever saw the Crimson Ghost in action, like a film splice of it, was in color because he was wearing a red robe, and it was in Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden on a VHS cassette tape that friends of mine had in 1996. Yes, 96, not 86, when it was cool to like Iron Maiden. In 96, it wasn't cool like Iron Maiden. I know it's cool to like Iron Maiden these days, and has been for the last 30 years, whatever. But not 30. It was not cool for the early 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s. Not until folks started taking their little kids to see Iron Maiden shows when they started coming back to the Americas again after hating us for so long. Anyhow, Fred C. Brannon and William Whitney's 12-chapter serial is action-packed, and it has the coolest villain ever. An evil mastermind with a smiling skull face and a hoodie. Some of us would say a cloak would be a more appropriate. I mean, a hoodie implies athletic wear, or jogging, or getting shot by a paranoid middle-aged white men who are probably racist. But no, the Crimson Ghost has a small army of loyal to a fault henchmen. That's true. Way big fault. And is hell-bent on obtaining a superweapon known as the cyclotrode. You're a cyclotrode, is what I would be hearing right now if my friend Dan Tyson was in the room. And if he's listening to this episode, I know he's really bored on a long drive down to Los Angeles or back north up from Los Angeles, because if he's listening to the Misfits episode, he's exhausted every other option. He's probably come back and just listen to the Steve Vai episodes again with him and Brian on it. Let's see. The Crimson Ghost. Oh yeah, it's right up there with the Solomonite in Plan 9 from Outer Space. I would say yes. Both of those are great names of imaginary, scientific-y super weapon things. Charles Quigley as Duncan Richards plays the rarest of academics, a two-fisted scientist. Richards doesn't hide behind his test tubes. When bad guys attack, he gets in on the action. And I noticed this too from the very beginning. Like, this is not the usual 1940s and definitely not the usual 1950s sci-fi black and white scientist kind of character, where he's either just very concerned about things in a very stodgy way about, we must find out what is making the ants so huge. Or a mad scientist with like crazy hair. You know, he's a man's man. He's going to mix it up with all these scumbags that are trying to sell out the United States and the world at large, and turn on us and maybe sell these secrets to the enemy. And he jumps over crap and he knocks crap over and he bashes some people's faces in. Two stars of Westerns seem to have swapped personas in The Crimson Ghost. Clayton Moore usually is the hero, but here he's a henchman named Ash. Meanwhile, Keen Duncan, or Kenny Duncan, Kenne, is usually a villain. He was nicknamed the meanest man in movies, but here he is an altruistic scientist. This brings us to another cool thing about The Crimson Ghost. Every serial has spirited fight scenes, but The Crimson Ghost really pushes it. The actors and stuntmen do a lot of leaping off of furniture. This is making me laugh because that's exactly what I was blown away by when I started watching this over a year ago. Like, they were just like, oh my God. It's just above and beyond what stuntmen should do for this little nickel and dime serial thing that they're being paid for, I would assume. I don't know how much money they were getting, but they were trying to prove themselves, it seems like. It was like, I don't know, indie wrestling show from the late 90s kind of stuff. The actors and stuntmen do a lot of leaping off furniture and nicely executed choreography. Anything to give the ticket buyer his 50 cents worth. When I interviewed Clayton Moore in 1992, he spoke a bit about the Crimson Ghost. That was at Republic, Moore then said. I believe it was my first serial at Republic. When I commented on the villain, Moore said, his name was I. Stanford Jolley, Jolley, I believe, Stan Jolley. We enjoyed the serials at Republic. We worked hard, however, and shot from sunup to sunset every day. Credits for the Crimson Ghost do not name which actor played the title Fiend. Neither does IMDb, but Wikipedia says that Jolley did the voice, while Bud Geary, a Western specialist who died that same year, played the Crimson Ghost in costume. I should also mention that Jolley played an unrelated character, a psychologist, in one chapter. Clayton Moore, of course, went on to become the Lone Ranger. Ken Duncan later ventured into horror, playing a gangster in The Astounding She-Monster in 1957, and a Swami in Ed Wood's Night of the Ghouls, 1958. You would always see I. Stanford Jolley pop up as a railroad employee in White Christmas, 1954, or a finger-wagging judge in The Wood penned The Violent Years. Oh, he's that guy, 1958. Okay, so if you're a Ministry fan, let me tell you, you've heard this guy's voice a million times. He is the voice that is sampled in So What from A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. He's the lecturing sort of, parents have no regard for raising their children, and the children have no respect. That whole thing. Kill for a thrill. Let's see. And then here's where Mark Voger once again. So in the intro and the outro, Mark Voger betrays his lack of musical awareness. He says, so the next time you see a hipster wearing a Misfits t-shirt, you'll know that logo where it came from. And to all Misfits fans, I recommend you watch the serial. It's freaky to see that smiling skull face in action. Yes, those hipsters. Hipsters being, this is a 2021 March post. I don't think hipsters have been a thing for a while, and I'm 44 and way behind the times. But hipsters, were, I don't know, around 2010 to 2020, maybe a little earlier, generally guys in very tight jeans and hard to maintain mustache fashions. Lots of mustache wax going on and curls there, and very specific kinds of longish but shaved-ish hair and bespoke threads, vests and fancy ties, and really into vintage vinyl and maybe listening to things on gramophone or whatever outdated technology they wanted to absorb their music in that other people couldn't really afford, like the masses wouldn't listen to. And your very, very twee hipster girls with their ukuleles and their bangs, their haircuts with bangs, maybe a little curly, maybe a little whatever the lady from The New Girl was looking like at one of her concerts that summer. Anyways, hipster did used to be a more general term, though, for hip cat kind of a thing. Like a little, hey, man, I'm too cool for your mainstream musical stuff, daddy-o. But punk rockers and, hey, if we want to be derogatory, the mall kids that got their Misfits gear at Hot Topic in the 90s and 2000s were the ones wearing the Misfits shirts. And good for them. They found fun music they loved. And all you crusty old punks who hated the young people for bringing it back and supporting these artists, fie, I say, fie on you. You know who doesn't act that way? Iron Maiden fans. Those teenagers single-handedly brought Iron Maiden back. They were ignoring the shit out of the United States for a long time after that whole Blaze Bayley debacle, and then bring in Bruce Dickinson back. Yes, they toured here in 2000 for the Brave New World album. I was there at the Tacoma Dome with a really shitty version of Queensryche I had to sit through, and then Rob Halford's solo band. Where am I going with this? Why does this have to do with Misfits and Halloween? Absolutely nothing, but just saying, be appreciative of the young people that made it so that the musicians that you were super cool to be into when you were their age could actually live out the rest of their life earning money off of their music and their t-shirts, okay? Don't discourage them for finding old stuff, even if it was at the mall. And you were cooler. You were cooler because you saw them in a show that everyone says they were at. That one of 75 special times where the band was getting hit in the face with beer bottles, blah, 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 blah. So as far as the Misfits' usage of the image, I shouldn't have said it that way. Use of the image, pardon me. He was pretty much forgotten as far as popular culture goes by the time 1979 rolls around, and they photocopied the, now ubiquitous sort of like crossed hands on the shoulders Misfits logo version of the Fiend for a show at Max's Kansas City, as we know, a place that they hated soon after playing there a few times. And it was Wednesday, March 28th, 79. It just shows the Misfits at Max's Kansas City, so no mention of the other bands that played then. I'm sure we could find that. Hang on, let me go check and do a little bit of sleuthing here. Yep, sure enough. Thank you, misfitscentral.com. So let's see. March 28th, the Misfits performed at Max's Kansas City for the last time. The poster for the show featured the band's first use of the Crimson Ghost, which Danzig and Jerry had taken from a poster for the movie of the same name. After the show, the Misfits were permanently banned from the club when Bobby Steele was arrested for allegedly hitting an audience member in the head with a glass thrown from the stage, which we've covered in the very first Misfits episode of the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. As a result, the band's upcoming performance at Max's Easter Music Festival was canceled. And also, while I'm on the timeline, I actually meant to say one more thing about the New Orleans mess. Let's see. They played like L.A. the week before that show. Let's see. They are at Florentine Gardens in L.A. on the 2nd of October, 82. They're at North Park Lions Club in San Diego on the 8th. On the 12th, they're in Tucson. And then they got from Tucson to Louisiana in 5 days, the 12th to the 17th. Wild. I mean, they must have been hauling ass. And no place to play in between for them. I mean, nothing. Either they didn't want to play in Texas or they really, really had to get to these Florida and Louisiana shows. Interesting. I think it's interesting. Don't you? So the Misfits first used the Fiend image that they had used for the Max's Kansas City poster for their own stuff on the Horror Business release. Okay. So the 7-inch Horror Business, you've seen it. You know it. It's the black background with the yellow outline of Horror Business, the Misfits, and the same image of the Crimson Ghost. And then from there on, they would use that image or various images of the Crimson Ghost for little inserts in their singles and EPs that would be your little instructions or your mail-in form to join the Misfits Fiend Club. And so, anytime you wanted to buy something from the Misfits, basically, you'd be seeing the Fiend's face telling you what to do. It's not unlike the Crypt Keeper in the EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt or Vault of Horror or Haunt of Terror, where, one of their mascots would be, showing up saying, "Hey, kiddies, send an envelope with this, with a stamp and some money to me and collect them all," or whatever the hell you're, trying to get from them. It's that sort of became the de facto mascot without being too silly. I gotta say, I think that's probably why it's endured so well. It's so expressionless and it's so just open to interpretation, like how intimidating you want it to be. And I will definitely say that the use of the Crimson Ghost on the later Misfits records without Glenn, especially Devil's Reign, are the ultimate example of the cover of an album being so much better than the content inside of it. And I mean the listening content, not the liner notes. In case you thought that's what I meant. I've never read the liner notes. I've barely listened to the music. It's really not fair of me to be this judgmental, but I mean, I'd say the same about Molly Hatchet. Good Lord, look at those old album covers. Nothing on those records is as cool as the cover for those Molly Hatchet painted, like Frank Frazetta looking things. Anyway, right, let's get on to something else. Oh, no, actually it's not. I didn't actually talk about the Crimson Ghost's driving motivation and his plans, and then I'll quit here and we'll move on. And for this, there's nothing like a good Wikipedia plot summary, because I can't put this much information into my own words and make it any more informative for you. The masked Crimson Ghost is determined to steal the Cyclotrode X, a device designed to repel atomic bomb attacks and that can disable electrical devices. Its inventor, university professor Dr. Chambers, demonstrates its powers at a faculty meeting by having it detect and fell a model airplane. After the meeting, two of the Ghost's henchmen attempt to steal the device, but Chambers destroys it to prevent them from doing so. Criminologist Duncan Richards, a colleague of Chambers, arrives and fights the henchmen. One of them, Ash, escapes. The other is killed when a collar around his neck is removed. I forgot to tell you about this part. There's murder. There's so much murder. Chambers informs his fellow professors, Richards, Anderson, Van Wyck, Maxwell, and Parker, that a duplicate cyclotrode is located in a bonded warehouse. Chambers finds himself in the mansion hideout of the Ghost, who explains to Chambers that he is one of his fellow professors and forces Chambers to wear a collar that will compel him to do his will. The Ghost notes that his collars are designed to kill the wearer if they are removed by anyone other than him. Chambers, under the Ghost's control, retrieves the duplicate cyclotrode from the warehouse. Richards pursues them by car. The Ghost commands Chambers to use the cyclotrode to impede Richards' car, and Richards narrowly avoids being sent hurling off a cliff. I'll get off of this in a second. Back in his mansion hideout, the Ghost relieves Chambers of this influence, tells him to make a larger, more powerful cyclotrode that would cripple entire cities. Instead, Chambers builds a death ray and sets it as a trap. This goes on and on and on. And to many people, I'm sure this sounds corny and cheesy. Like, oh, they're just like making it up as they go along to extend this weird little premise, and they just keep adding little complications. They're just going to keep adding another car chase, and they're probably just going to add another fist fight. And, oh, well, you've been released from this, but now I have a bigger plot for you, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's how huge budget television programs are made now. That's how entire Star Wars movies are written now. With like, what do we got to have them do next? I don't know. Let's send them to this planet. For what? Let's make up something that they have to go get. You know, I mean, oh, we've been renewed for a 6th season? Shit. Well, this will buy us time before we have to figure out how to end the damn thing. And if we don't get canceled, hopefully we just get canceled, don't have to end the damn thing. This is me playing the part of a person who's created a highly successful television series because, I've been around since the X-Files. I've been paying attention. I know how annoyed all my friends won't tell me that they were with the eventual petering out and awful at the end of Lost when that stopped being a going concern. I was there when Felicity cut off all of her hair to make things interesting, I guess. I don't know. I had a roommate that was really into that show. But also, as I mentioned, I've watched professional wrestling. And I had to stop watching in these waning years. I came into it after some. This is relevant, I swear to God. After some time away, I stopped. I started watching in 2000. Stopped watching in 2003. Started watching again in 2018. Then the pandemic happened, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And clearly, when it comes to WWE, this crazy old man that was out of touch with reality was just making things up on a weekly basis and then changing them as he went along in real time. And that's probably the worst example of it, but big budget streaming services with a high, with big audiences do this on their very successful shows as well. Not day to day and moment to moment. They don't decide that, you know what, Brock Lesnar was going to be the last match, but now he's going to be the first match. Get out there, Seth Rollins, and you open this show at WrestleMania. But for me, this kind of thing, this serial, this Crimson Ghost story, this is the perfect example of the balance. This is the balance. You're okay with it because it is supposed to be cheap entertainment, but it's supposed to be badass. It's like Beavis and Butthead watching, I think they were watching a Fudge Tunnel video or something like that. in the 90s, and an episode, and of course it's in the 90s. No one refers to the 2000s episodes of Beavis and Butthead. But, you know, it's like, I don't know if it was Fudge Tunnel. I don't know if it was Green Apple Quick Step or some other band, but like, you know, they were saying, this sucks. Yeah, but it might kick ass. Like, what do you mean? Well, and Beavis says, well, you know, like the Jesus Lizard, like they suck, but at least they kick ass. That's all most of us want. Like, it's okay if you're not perfect. It's okay if you're not great. It's kind of okay if you're only barely good. If you kick some ass, if you mean it. And the Crimson Ghost, to me, I think is a perfect balance of like, you don't have to be into it emotionally. It's a great, weird conspiracy story from the mid-century American paranoia brain of atomic energy and secret weapons and death. Like they're combining international espionage with like crazy death ray technology and stuff. That's what's magical, I think, to anyone that really does love America in this way that I do. I love the mid-century and the space age, atomic age America, minus the racism and sexism. And okay, so all right, I guess I can't. That falls apart. Damn it. Well, you know, minus the you can't say all that and then minus like the segregated fountains and like throwing acid in the public pool when there's oh God. All right. Well, I mean cultural. Well, not culture. I mean movies and music and TV shows, I guess. Yeah. Whatever. Born in the USA, I was liking cars back then and the doo-wop music and DC Comics with the gory stuff. Saxophone solos in the hit songs of the day now.
Yeah, I've been noticing that in my approach to editing and filming stuff that it's another reason why I wanted to take the special to podcasts first, but not the ones that were and I mean no apology, but I do have like celebrity friends who bank on their name as opposed to their creative output, which is another reason why I chose to go this route, because I think it's more honest. Like I think your genuine point of view without the idea of name recognition and all that bullshit. I don't know. I've seen friends of mine go the celebrity route where they present themselves as this thing and then suddenly they become the thing because other people just accept the word of others that it's good as opposed to their own judgments. And I think that's manipulative to a degree that's a little excessive in these times. I don't know how to quite word it, but I thought if I went to people that didn't really know me, who were creative and putting out their own podcast and probably needed content, I'm like, oh, this might be interesting for them. And I think the challenge of them not giving a shit about me would let them appreciate the work or dissect the work. We would have a genuine conversation, not some bullshit fucking sales pitch. I don't want to do that. Yeah, no, it's the arts. Here's the thing. Here's the way I've been putting it to my buddies is like we were talking about like bands and we're talking about comedy and the way everyone acts online. I was like, look, it's all turning into professionally wrestling except professional wrestling. It's the only place they're like, hey, we're just entertainment. This is fake. Everyone else is, no, this is real. And you're like, no, it's not. You're selling communism, you fucking liar. You're selling communism. You have your Patreon, you got your money, you're rich, you're getting so much money selling. Nobody have all the money. It's fucking, it's almost like communism, to be quite honest. It's fucking great.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens with the Misfits after their second record with Michael Graves, after Famous Monsters comes out. They're doing a lot of interesting sort of marketing and cross-promotion. And one of these endeavors happens in 1999, around November, when they hook up with World Championship Wrestling, Ted Turner's organization. I always enjoy a good wrestling reference on our episodes here. Of course, you've heard quite a few before if you've listened long enough.
The baddest man in the world.
That's right, Dusty. Thank you.
Right now, I'm not wearing any pants. Just kidding.
That's not Dusty Rhodes. Wait a minute, I'm hitting the wrong button.
Now and there.
That's right.
Live in color, Jack.
That's right, Jack. All right. So they are actually going to be compensated pretty handsomely by WCW. I don't know what the actual amount is with this little cross promotion with the wrestler named Vampiro. You can look this up if you want and check out some still images from the era or some footage from the era where the Misfits would show up on, I think, Monday Nitro episodes. I don't know if they ever, if they shuttled them over to Thursday Thunder, that would have been a bad sign. But I wasn't watching at the time. This is just history of weirdness that I love. I love watching YouTube videos about, anyways. I hate to give the impression that I'm a wrestling enthusiast / historian, but I'm a partaker of various YouTube channels like Wrestling Bios and Wrestlemania, and of course the guys at OSW Review. Love them a lot. All three of those, if you are into this kind of stuff. The Misfits got together with WCW in the middle of Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff's Monday Night War with WWF and the McMahon family. Nitro was on, Monday nights every week live, and WWF had Monday Night Raw, and there was a huge ratings war that went on for quite a little while, and it was a hell of an ordeal, enough that you can watch many hours of a documentary about it called The Monday Night War on Peacock, but it's totally skewed in favor of WWF. I would be happy to watch one that's a little more unbiased, but you can't really do that. Even you can do a lot on YouTube, but you can't show more than a couple seconds of footage of a lot of different events without getting dinged by one of these two companies that's going to, take your video down. So I'll have to rely on the narrative laid out by James Green Jr. once again in this Music Leader Stains. So he talks about how Monday Night Raw and Monday Nitro were in a fierce battle for several hours worth of basic cable Nielsen ratings. Macho Man Randy Savage, the gravel-voiced WWF superstar, who reigned in the 1980s as a wildly gesticulating cowboy, perpetually bedecked in neon fringe, defected to WCW in the mid-1990s, reinventing himself as a black-clad heel. Heel is just a general industry term for bad guy that goes back to the early days of when they created kayfabe, when they were when wrestling was, wrestling's been fixed for a long time, but when the bread and butter of wrestling promotion was in the carnival days, traveling carnivals and stuff in America, in the, let's say, early 1900s onward, it was important to send telegrams to people in other cities to, business-wise, lay out what the angle was going to be for these shows. And they would say babyface and heel instead of good guy and bad guy. And they would say go over instead of win or lose, that kind of thing. There's a whole lot more to it that I won't get into. You can go find those podcasts for yourself. So the text goes on to say, he was a black-clad heel complete with a buxom 5-foot blonde wrapped in skin-tight leather. The woman in question was Gorgeous George, a.k.a. Stephanie Bellers, Savage's real-life girlfriend. And on the A&E, I think it was like a bio of Randy Savage a couple of years ago. She's being interviewed, and she talks about they were just on ecstasy every single day during this era, and they would just go out in front of arenas full of people and just talk on the mic and really not do a whole lot, but just feel amazing, I guess. And she was like a stripper that was half his age, I believe. The pair met in 1997 at a strip club where Bellers was a performer. They began dating, and Savage eventually used his clout to bring Stephanie into the WCW fold as his valet. The bloom was off the rose by late 99, though. Bellers had grown increasingly fed up with Savage's bizarre demands. The final straw allegedly came when he suggested a menage a trois with her 17-year-old sister. And she began looking for a new paramour. She quickly found one in Doyle. Once the Misfits began regularly appearing alongside Vampiro, quiet, even-keeled, and classically handsome, out of his corpse makeup, Doyle was almost the mirror opposite of Randy Savage, save the similar brick shithouse physique. The guitarist was equally enamored of the flashy Bellers, and their love blossomed despite the fact that Doyle already had a wife. Randy Savage, a man known outside the ring for carrying a temper, as hair-trigger as that of his beloved beef jerky chomping character, a la Snap Into a Slim Jim, if you recall. My words, not the text. Was equal parts heartbroken and enraged when it became apparent Stephanie was shunning him for Doyle. The breaking point arrived one evening that December. I mean, that's not very long. We're talking 99, late 99, November to December. So like we're talking, I guess, a month of interaction with the Misfits and the folks at WCW. And they have a show at this point, I know once a week. If I don't remember when Thunder came on Thursdays, but it was like the beat level stuff. Just to try to get more time on the air to get people to watch Monday Nitro. Let's see. Bellers stood her former lover up after the wrestling legend secured box seats at an NFL game in an attempt to woo her back. In an angry tailspin, the Macho Man made some calls, discovered where the Misfits were performing that night. The House of Blues in New Orleans, and immediately chartered a jet so he could finally confront and or mortally wound Doyle. Well, I'm okay, that's taking some liberties. On behalf, I think Mr. Chris Green Jr. is taking liberties with the word love blossomed between the two. I think that's entirely speculative, and that he's going to immortally. I mean, if there's documentation of that, then great. If someone knows, or if somebody could provide the context for the idea that Randy was like, oh yeah, I'll kill this guy. I'm willing to go to prison, for this guy for sneaking off with my little blonde bunny. Let's see. Being one of the most famous faces of American pop culture, Savage easily breezed past security upon his arrival. And which makes sense because people probably knew like, the Misfits are doing this thing with all these pro wrestlers. And they probably talked about how much they like pro wrestling at the time too. Danzig has done the same. Especially around that era. Savage easily breezed past security, planted himself firmly backstage. The Misfits, in the middle of their headlining performance, were flabbergasted when they noticed the angry Macho Man waiting in the wings. Clearly visible as he shotgunned beer after beer. Mere seconds after pounding out the final guitar chord of the night, a very aware Doyle leapt into the crowd and exited through the venue's front door. Moments later, Michael Graves and Gore's Matt McGuire found themselves cornered by a frothing Randy Savage. "Where's Dooley?" he seethed in that famous voice, violently manhandling a trembling Graves in the process. Graves and McGuire were adamant that they nothing typos in the text. I assume it means they knew nothing of Doyle's whereabouts. The pair pleaded with Savage to not brutalize anyone. After a few minutes of tense back and forth, Savage slithered off into the night. Interestingly enough, Jerry only steered clear of this brouhaha, which was odd considering the amount of time he allegedly spent egging wrestlers on before and after WCW events. The boisterous only would openly challenge younger and more experienced industry professionals like Bill Goldberg to unsanctioned matches backstage, embarrassing his bandmates. Jerry's dreams of conquering the squared circle became so overwhelming that for a brief moment the other Misfits considered letting their founding bass player go after his sports entertainment dreams. A series of talks were held, weighing the pros and cons of forming a brand new group with Vampiro on bass. That wouldn't happen, though. Only effectively dashed his wrestling dreams by taking up a union among WCW stable talent. The Misfits. Oh, talking up a union. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good way to get kicked out, as Jesse Ventura can tell you. And Hulk Hogan stooged on him to Vince McMahon, telling him he was trying to unionize the guys backstage in the 80s. Let's see. Misfits then were released from their wrestling contracts shortly thereafter. This brief, contentious episode as grapplers was but a microcosm of the interpersonal problems that continued to plague the band. Many on the inside could see the end was coming. Now, there's also a note in here about how like Jerry had a wrestling ring built in his dad's shop so he could like practice, running the ropes and stuff. And I'm just going to check on a YouTube video I watched about a year ago that details this whole thing. I think it's Wrestling Bios, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll delete this if I'm wrong, and I'll add to this if I am right.
Well, look, I can't disagree with it because I think human beings are pretty basic and stupid. And I mean that lovingly. Individually we can create a bunch of things, but as a group we still have the mind of a child. It's a different psychology between group think and the individual think. And I think we get kind of caught up because we still, as a species, one hasn't defined what a human being is, so we really don't know what we are. Like if I asked you, what's a human being? You would give me your personal definition, but maybe there's a textbook definition, but for some reason we don't all seem to agree on these certain traits about human beings, and pattern recognition is definitely one of them. You also look at a conflation of ideas when you bring up Jordan Peterson. Like it's a difficult conversation to have when an attention economy provides money depending on whether you choose to be left or right. But if you go for a more middle or nuanced take, you're kind of pushed away because you can't really put advertising to that.
Don't forget to visit our refreshment center during the intermission or any time. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. So will the youngsters. Everything is quality and so good. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble, a gay, pleasant evening for all. Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake. And Mom or Pop, go with the kids when they leave the car. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
Something I've been trying to learn for myself because I work a lot with younger comics because I don't, and I do so with very respectful boundaries as far as understanding that when new artists jump into a thing, if someone's been doing it for a while, it's very easy for the person that's been doing it for a while to manipulate newer people into thinking of them in a better light, and I just reject that because I find that it's bad for the art. And I've noticed that with the newer comics, you could tell them, hey, watch out for this. If you do things this way, it's going to screw you in this way. And I know that because I've seen it for 20 years. I'm not... excuse me, I'm sorry. I got a cold. All the mechanizations that make you think that this is the way to go are put in place by an industry that wants you to stay in your place because they don't own you. They own the people that are already succeeding. They have their hands in that. So people who really want it so bad, who can't grasp with that kind of challenge, who just want to be discovered, who just want to be seen, fall easily into these traps, which is why it's important for us to be a little more kinder towards that instead of, man, these fucking idiots can't see the real fucking system, man. Because that to me is what fucked up in the 70s and 80s. We were like, yeah, man, we're going to fucking take down the government through my fucking punk band. And you're like, no, that's not, whoops. That didn't work. So close.
Okay, one fun little detail that I just learned is that the Misfits are actually a replacement for the Insane Clown Posse, who were already aligned with Vampiro initially, and they've been involved in their own sort of wrestling hijinks and promotions and stuff for a while, and have been since. But they had to go on tour after appearing a certain amount of times and forming a sort of group or a stable, as they say, with Vampiro called the Deadpool. But then they had to vacate. They had to get their asses on the road and do some stuff. So Vampiro said, what if we pick another band? What if that band plays me to the ring? And he's thinking about who would be appropriate, since he wears like white face makeup and stuff that kind of, narrows your choices. And the folks in the creative department at WCW were very, very resistant to this. But he assured them it would all be fine and to trust his instincts and his creative direction.
I can tell you. Oh, I can tell you right now, man. First of all, like we're operating under a faulty premise, and it's one that I've really been trying to research and figure out. It's we're operating under the lenses of the 20th century, with the perspective. Like when we're talking about boomers, hippies, all these things, none of that really exists because people really haven't changed. When you're talking about those crystal people, like those people were around in the 20s. They were just wearing those stupid fucking feather dresses with the low tops and the weird hat to the side. But, right, a lot of this is tied into our economics and our leisure classes, of course, and those things are coming up and down. Human beings are fairly predictable. So when you're talking about a crash and burn in this generation, what I like to do is I always just kind of ask, and I didn't feel the need to because I kind of already got the gist of it based on your output, is I always ask people, hey, what are your values? And I don't mean that the way I think everyone else means that. Like when I say, what are your values? Most people think, oh, am I a good moral person? I'm like, no, I don't care if you're a good person. I don't give a shit about that. It's just, what do you care about? Like if someone's in, if I borrow money from a friend, I'm going to make sure my friend gets that money back. Stuff like that. That's a value to me, taking care of the people around. And we don't talk about that because the money isn't there anymore.
When they made their appearance, they weren't actually playing him to the ring the first time they showed up on WCW television because it was totally spontaneous. It just so happened that WCW was having a show in an arena in the same town the Misfits were playing on the same night, the 1st of November, 1999. Supposedly, it was actually on the same block across the street. So Vampiro walks over to the venue, gets in touch with the Misfits somehow. I mean, I'm sure somebody at WCW contacted, the management or whatever, or maybe the promoters of that show. I mean, if you put on big performances in a major city often enough, you probably have access to the network of people. If it's, I mean, if you have a good relationship with them, anyways. So Misfits are good. For it. They think it sounds like a good time. They come across the street and walk, Jerry, Doyle, Dr. Chud, and Michael Graves in full makeup, walk Vampiro down to the ring to have a match with a guy named Berlin. Yeah, fun boy. And they end up getting involved in the match too. They end up actually helping, hold down Berlin's feet so he can't kick out of the view of the referee, of course. That never happens. And they get to celebrate in the ring. Unfortunately, the crowd mostly greeted them with chants of "We want ICP" instead of fanfare for the Misfits' surprise appearance. I just heard something I have to remark on, but I want you to hear it first from the from the mouth of the man himself, Andy something. It's Andy on What Culture Wrestling. He sets this up too perfectly. If you're maybe slightly critical, a Misfits fan when it comes to Jerry Only.
Jerry Only is a very intense person. Vampiro has said in the past that the guy is pretty much permanently on a 24-hour caffeine binge. He pours all of that into his music.
Oh, that's a shame. Considering what we've seen of his recorded output over the years, post 1983, I would say. That's not a good thing if he pours 24 hours of his energy into his music for all these decades. And what do we get for it? I mean, the 50s covers and the I don't know, the Devil's Rain album and all the other, oh God.
The thoughts are way more nuanced and detailed than that, and what we can deal with in our everyday life. It's like these friends of ours. Like I don't know if you suffer from this from well, but I have a lot of empathy, and so it gets used against me quite often. So I have to be on guard at all times. So it's not a fun life. But a lot of my friends who are or people, casual acquaintances, social media, and whatnot, they're posting every week these brand new problems that they never fix. And anytime you bring up it, like, hey, what about the 3,000 other things you keep screaming about, making my day worse for knowing about that you haven't done? Like, when are you going to do something? When are you going to actually fix one of them? And they're like, you know what? We can. The human brain can think about more than one problem at a time. And I'm like, are you sure? Have you met any people? Have you met someone before? I'm just curious if you've ever met a person. Because it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, here's another great quote from Andy H. Murray. Hang on.
Given a one-year WCW contract,
This is Jerry Only.
and if you believe Vampiro, he thought that he was going to be the next Hulk Hogan. Jerry Only did not end up being the next Hulk Hogan. But still, you've got to admire that level of dedication.
No, you don't. He's delusional. He said he's as great as Led Zeppelin. You don't got to admire that. Those are the thoughts and actions and words of an incredibly entitled person who demands things he has not earned from the world and recognition that he doesn't deserve from the fans and the audience and the industry and the universe. Why is it? Who's the entitled generation now? Plus, someone please remind me. Now, by comparison, does this make Glenn Danzig a better human being? No, not at all. The crappy, new Star Wars trilogy being crappy and poorly written doesn't make the crappy prequel trilogy that's poorly written any better by comparison either. Danzig, of course, is super egomaniacal in his own right, but I think he is in more personal, small ways. He doesn't have that more people should respect my output of my music, at least not anymore. If he ever did, he always seemed to come across to me in interviews in the 80s and 90s as like, I do what I do. Nobody should have a problem with it unless they got like a bug up their ass. And if they don't understand what I'm all about, I'm not going to sit around and teach them unless they're going to pay me for it. So, he's egomaniacal probably in terms of what he what he deserves in terms of female attention, probably, especially, demonic women that are shaped like snakes with probably 15 boobs or something like that. He's probably constantly surprised that he's not having sex with 7 of them at once every single day after lunch, and they're not beating down the door to his mansion with all the bricks out front and the Jaguar X. Is it Jaguar X7? I don't remember, but he moved. He sold that place, left a bunch of action figures laying around in the basement, I guess, that he didn't feel like taking to the dump or whatever. The other details from this What Culture Wrestling video that I will link in the description are pretty interesting too. It does detail the same story that we already just went over with Randy Macho Man Savage getting pissed off at Doyle and trying to confront him on the side of the stage at the House of Blues during one of their shows. He bails out, and the other band members, what I didn't know was the other band members stayed backstage with Macho Man and did everything they could to sort of calm him down and dissuade him from chasing after Doyle through the crowd as Doyle, got the hell out of there. And even to the, I guess, even down to the detail that Michael Graves kept referring to him as Mr. Man, as if Macho was his first name and Man was his last name. Another interesting thing is they threw Jerry Only in the ring with Dr. Death Steve Williams, who is well known for being incredibly real when it comes to hurting people in the ring and loving a good brawl. And, he bashed up Doyle pretty good. He, like a lot of guys, would need stitches on his eyebrow that would have been busted open for bleeding purposes, which is a common thing to do. It's not going to permanently damage anyone. It's easy to sort of bust that skin right there and cause some very theatrical looking but real bleeding. And Jerry Only, excuse me if I said Doyle a minute ago, I mean Jerry. Jerry was totally shocked when he went back up the ramp to the backstage area and immediately asked, okay, who do I go see to get this fixed up? And the response was, I don't know, nobody. They didn't have anybody on staff. They didn't have any medical personnel there that traveled with WCW to take care of guys. They are all, I think, they had contracts, but they are independent contractors, just like they are in WWF, WWE, and in the entire wrestling world, as far as I know. And he said he was more than happy to get on the phone with his lawyers because he's had a lot of time with a lot of good legal advice at this point, because we're talking, 1999 now. And he's been through a lot of stuff with the rights to the Misfits name, the rights to the Misfits logo, and the merch money and all that stuff. And he said, he was going to make sure that this didn't happen, and that he was going to make sure that they unionized WCW talent and got them compensation and benefits and medical care and things like that. Well, you can pretty much guess what the office's response was to that. I think we're done having the Misfits on the Monday Nitro appearances and filming and tapings, and definitely not going to have them at pay-per-views or anything else important. Let's just stop. Of course, he was still under contract, I suppose, for whatever that got him, but I know that a lot of those wrestlers, a lot of their money comes from actually appearing at events, not just having a contract. But I don't know what I think there's like a yearly base sort of payment that you get no matter what, but it's, probably not enough to just live off of if you're not going to shows, appearing, selling merchandise, and getting a small cut of that. Jerry, for his part, also says that WCW wanted to take over the Misfits brand, name, imagery, and just steal it from him. Including Vampiro has corroborated this. No one at WCW, backstage, or in the office corroborated this. It's just one of those things that he, I think everything Jerry does is so incredibly important as far as he's concerned that who wouldn't want to steal it away from him? See? Perpetual victim, but still the biggest badass ever in his own mind. How many people do we know like that? Lots.
I think in this culture, we've turned narcissism into a victim mindset, where narcissists are now playing the parts of the victims and using the same language. And so instead of presenting themselves as like, I'm great and wonderful, it's I'm being destroyed. It's still the I, and it's still self-centered. It still ignores so much. And I really think that so much of it has permeated entertainment in general that a lot of people are suffering from psychosis and falling apart because of this illusion that that we matter. I don't fucking know how to finish this, but I think you understand what I'm saying.
And now for a return to the Danzig side of things. This is an interview from Tales from the Crypt, not the comic book. Spring 1982, Glenn Danzig, singer, songwriter, and master monster of the Misfits, was interviewed during the band's recent appearance in Los Angeles. You guys have been playing this kind of music for a long time. So what are your feelings on the current horror rock trend? We've been doing this since 78. But as long as we don't get accused of jumping on a bandwagon, I guess it's all right. I don't like when people do it real faggy, because what we do is real ballsy, real gutsy. And I hate like reading that word. It sucks. But of the time, it was more accepted. And I know that sucks too. Around the year 1999, 2000, we had some music by a guy named Eminem that used the word a lot more prolifically. So considering, I would say, where popular culture was at in the year 2000 compared to this conversation in 82, I think technically Danzig is more progressive than all of America and their attitude toward homosexuality in 99, 2000. Okay, let me take that back. Maybe the hip hop world and the young people that liked hip hop at the time. Maybe I'm full of shit and don't know shit. Also, very likely. You've seen the words to our songs, you know. We're not gimmicky with fake blood and all that stuff. This is real modern American horror. This is what we're about, modern American horror. So you guys always been exactly like you are now? Yeah, that's what's to me about, I don't know, about the current hardcore thing. Because back in 78, 79, we were banned from everywhere for being too hot to handle. People at our shows always went wild, and that's not that's accepted today. And that's what's accepted today. Jesus, balls. I don't know, guys. You've been through quite a bit of lineup changes, haven't you? This is our third guitarist, and we're always getting different drummers. Because for some reason, drummers are fucked in the head. Most bands I know have problems with drummers. Doyle, though, isn't the best guitarist we've ever had. Jesus. A lot of people don't like him because he doesn't play a lot of leads. But we don't like leads. We are not Journey or Styx. Could you tell us something about the tour you're on? Well, we've done New York, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, San Francisco, and now we're wrapping it up in LA. Are you happy with the way your album came out? We've made attempts to do albums before, but it never sounds like us. But we finally found a place that's halfway decent. All your singles were released on your own label? Yeah, Plan 9 Records. There's 2 people besides the band that help finance it. You guys supposed to do a single with Dave Vanian, weren't you? That's how it's written. You guys supposed to do a single. The was added by me. It's all recorded except for Dave's part if he gets around to doing it. If not, Jerry will do it instead. Oh, really? I don't think so. I don't think you would let that happen, Glenn. What bands do you like? I mean, obviously it didn't happen, but whatever. What bands do you like? Influences? Nobody influences us. We're just doing what we do, and we do it because that's the we are. That's the we are. I enjoy listening to the Black Flag with Henry. I like the Necros. I enjoy early Sham 69. I like a lot of old stuff and old horror movie soundtracks like The Omen. Anything Jerry Goldsmith does, I dig. He's great. What are some of your favorite horror movies? I've seen a lot that I can't remember the names of. Real sleaze budget movies where people are thrown into ovens and cooked and eaten. Real sick stuff. Anything with David Cronenberg. He's done They Came From Within and Rabid. Cronenberg, of course, if you don't know, goes on to do The Fly. Videodrome was before that, and a bunch of other stuff that's pretty body horror centric throughout his career. What kind of followers do you have? All kinds of people. People into horror films, skins, and kids who aren't pretentious about the way they look. What I don't like is these trendy punk rock guys with Mohicans. You can tell trendies right off. With Mohicans, you can tell trendies right off. Yeah, whatever. Basically, we like anybody into the music, unless they're burnout or stupid. I hate stupid people. Do you guys stress politics in our music? I don't know if this interviewer has ever listened to the Misfits or knows about them and is does and is feigning ignorance just to ask the question about do you stress politics in your music? No, we're not a political band and we don't want to be a political band. You hear too much politics all the time as it is. I'm not saying there shouldn't be political bands, but we're not one. What do you have planned after this tour? A new album pretty soon. We've got some new songs like Demonomania and We Bite. we're going to record here in LA this time, but we didn't get a chance. We're going to do a video which should be out by this summer. What's that video? Is that a movie? Is that a video like with a couple songs of live performances? Someone call in and tell me. Every time there's an interview, they keep talking about a thing that they're doing right now and it's just about to come out that I've never seen or heard of. Anything you want to add? Yeah. If anybody out there has skulls, jawbones, you name it, send it to us, care of the Fiend Club. So the Misfits, as of this interview, are Glenn Danzig, Jerry Only, Doyle, and Arthur Googie. Let's see, it says the discography up to this point is singles, Halloween 1, Halloween 2, 3 Hits from Hell EP, Night of the Living Dead /Ratfink /Where Eagles Dare, Beware of the Misfits, 12-inch EP, Horror Business /Teenagers from Mars /Children in Heat, and then Bullet /We Are 138 /Attitude /Hollywood Babylon album, Walk Among Us. So that is the full available and cataloged recorded output up to that point for the Misfits, according to what journalists, I guess, know at that point. So don't send me death threats if I didn't include something that was technically available at the time in the UK or whatever with a different colored cover, blah, 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 because I'm just reading what's on the page. This is a interview from Wave Sector, 1981. And from what I found, Wave Sector was related to KUSF, a San Francisco radio station. So I'm going to be sure and read this in the appropriate kind of San Francisco 1982, accent or vernacular. No, vernacular is the wrong word. But anyway, the fellow's name is Steven Spinelli, who wrote this. And I've decided this is what he sounds like. The Misfits remain as one of only a few punk bands internationally who have stayed true to the spirit of 77 and have extended their skill into both their recorded output and live performances. I have a feeling that long after the Clash have put out their quadruple album box set or guitar solos, the Misfits will continue to churn out rootsy, powerful, hardcore music that communicates with authority and bite. With song titles like Ghouls Night Out, Children in Heat, and A Horror Hotel, you quickly realize this is not a typical band, and that their concerns are novel, to say the least. The Misfits' trashy, searing, brash musical style has drawn a strong following in the native New York, where sellout crowds are usually the rule. On the West Coast, Misfits remain relatively unknown, an unfortunate result of their poor record distribution. In my opinion, their current American tour and debut album, The Misfits Walk Among Us, will make their obscurity a thing of the past. Glenn Danzig, the band's chief spokesman, mentioned that the Misfits were a genuine hardcore group before hardcore punk, as a genre even existed, and certainly before it was fashionable. The Misfits' reputation as a violent band made gigs in the early days harder to come by than today. Nonetheless, the electrifying live shows jolted the staid New York audiences of 1977 through 78. And after releasing their first single, She, they put out their Better Dead on Red EP, which became a success. To this day, it sold almost 10,000 copies. It included his Bullet, a chilling comment on the Kennedy assassination, and the enigmated We Are 138, which almost nobody knows the meaning of. In 1979, the Misfits toured the British Isles in support for the Damned, where their wild reputation had preceded them. A song from Three Hits from Hell, London Dungeon, tells when Glenn was thrown into a Brixton jail for defending himself from some angry skinheads. Skinheads at the time affiliated with ska, not punk. In jail, he was beaten by the police. Yeah, he chuckles. But it took 4 of them. The Misfits were also slated to support The Clash during their tour, but the group's drummer, Mr. Jim, disappeared inexplicably, depriving the band of their most crucial gig. Even so, it was after that trip to England that the Misfits' cult following began to grow. Some of this popularity stemmed from a series of superb EP releases, although their Night of the Living Dead EP suffered from poor recording. The material reestablished the Misfits' mastery of the hardcore punk formula. Harder Business qualified as their most chilling release. It was recorded in an abandoned haunted house in New Jersey, and engineers noticed sounds on the final recording which were not a result of the band's performance. No explanation of the sounds could be given by the group or the recording crew. 1981 has seen the release of several important Misfits items. 3 Hits from Hell, which features London Dungeon, and Ghoul's Night Out, a solo single by Glenn Danzig, who killed Marilyn. The late October unveiling of Halloween, and finally their debut album, The Misfits Walk Among Us. After 4 years, this LP demonstrates that the Misfits are faithful to their original punk ideas, a fact that doesn't readily apply to the many contemporary British and American bands. Glenn agrees that many of the seminal punk bands from 1977 sold out to their record companies. I hate that disco-ized crap that a lot of bands are putting out today, he says. The Misfits Walk Among Us continues the Misfits' exploration into the dank and chilly realm of American horror mythology. Standout numbers include the sci-fi thrash out are turned into a Martian and Astro Zombies. Their remixed version of Night of the Living Dead ranks as a personal favourite. There are no political or social points raised on the Misfits Walk Among Us, but I like it that way. The Misfits have recorded their own terrifying imaginary world, and they use it as a springboard for some of the most powerful rock played anywhere today. The Misfits are currently working on the soundtrack to a horror film, and in late November, the American tour begins. We've never yet gotten our real sound on record, Glenn admits, but we're at our best when we're playing live. The most interesting bit of Misfits news concerns the band's tie to Dave Vanian, lead vocalist to English punkers The Damned. Apparently, according to Danzig, the Misfits will back Vanian on several tracks that will do for Dave Vanian what Dancing with Myself did for Billy Idol. Any person wanting more information on this project, the Misfits in general, or unannounced releases can apply for membership to the Misfits Fan Club. P.O. Box 3112 Grand Central Station, New York. 10163. Failure to do so will certainly guarantee sickness or death. Along with this article is an uncredited 1981 photo of the band at a New Jersey cave, taken by Eerie Vaughn.
Right. Well, they attach. I don't know. Like the idea of relevance is gone because there's just too much shit. You can't have a culture where information is doubling at a rate so fast that it surmounts actual civilization. You can't really. There's really no. I don't know. I was trying to explain it right before I talked to you. I had a conversation with a good buddy of mine. He's this comic out of New York named Canal Aurora. He's a very funny Indian comic, but he's a New Yorker first. You know, he's not trying to do with the ethnic thing, but he embraces it. It's a part of him, but he has his own unique voice. And so I sent him the special. And now you got to understand, this is a guy who is busting his ass, putting out the podcast. He's doing everything the way you think you're supposed to do things because you've seen other people do them. Well, I have a presence. I'm constantly pushing this idea that I'm doing this thing. Well, he can't stand the special. He was so mad at me. He was so fucking furious, and he gave me probably the greatest. I might use it for the tagline of it. I wrote it down literally right before he goes, "It's one big nightmare, and it doesn't make sense." And he was like, "There's 3 specials happening at once." I'm like, "No, man, there's commercial breaks. That's what separates it." Like, he couldn't grasp it because even though he appreciates the message and he absolutely believes it too, that's the other thing. They all believe it. The belief that you might hit the lottery means more than your own actual instincts. It's a puzzle, dude. Like, you're putting stories, like, listen, you have to research because you're covering subjects that have been very well covered. So you have to find a way. You have to find questions. You have to find the same way that I look at it. The way you're doing your podcast and approaching it is the same way I would approach topical comedy. You don't focus on the topical jokes. You don't do current events. Okay. If you focus on current events, the jokes are disposable. They go away. But if you focus on what motivates the current events, you're going to find that those things are always there and they always stay the same because the current events change, but the motivators never do.
From Flesh and Blood, 1983. Right below that, it says Flesh and Bones talked to Glenn Danzig in the depths of his basement while watching Dr. Butcher and Galaxy of Terror. The Misfits have been touring a lot lately. Is that the way? It helps a lot. You could put out a record and sell a few thousand if you're lucky. But if you play a lot of different places, you're going to reach more people and get more of a response, and you'll sell more records too. Some bands say, I don't want to make money. I don't care about that. Sure, but if you have a chance to make money from the band, why not? It beats working a boring job. There's magazines like Maximum Rock and Roll ragging on bands because they get money from playing. What do they want? Do they expect bands to tour across the country and play for nothing? I mean, who's going to pay for gas? The Communist Party of America or the Maximum Rock and Roll Fund for struggling artists? And it's bullshit that we play for large guarantees even when we do get a guarantee. It's nowhere near what a band like the Dead Kennedys get. But if they can get the money from clubs, great. They shouldn't put down other bands for trying to get guarantees. I'm sick of people saying what's right and wrong, what you should and shouldn't do. Do what you want. Personally, I'd love to be rich, wouldn't you? Have you played smaller places? Oh, sure, we played in Akron and had no idea how big the scene was there. We played for 30 to 40 people in this place that was the size of somebody's basement. But it's still the same gig. You still put on the same show. A lot of bands won't play in towns where there isn't a big scene. But in order for a scene to grow, you have to have bands play there and get people interested. On our next tour, we're playing Boise, Idaho. I don't think any band has ever been up there, not even Black Flag, where no band has gone before. If Robo and me had our way, that band would constantly be on tour, maybe break for a month or two. But Jerry and Doyle have jobs, and they'll have to keep working until the band can support itself. Any good shows recently? Boston show the other night was a real killer. It was a lot of fun. At one point, there were like 100 people on stage, and you couldn't move at all. We were trying to get people away from the power amps. Doyle was pinned against his amp, and there were so many kids. Boston has a really unique scene. It's totally crazy. They have these pig piles, and everybody jumps on each other and piles on. It's so much fun, you have to jump it. After a while, with all the people, it gets really wild, but nobody gets hurt. Well, I haven't seen anybody get hurt bad at our shows, The Boston kids are into having fun. There's no heavy-duty politics or anything. I suppose there's some politics filtered in, but it's basically fun, and that's what's missing from a lot of scenes. Do you ever get bothered by rednecks on tour? Well, yeah. Well, I get bothered right around here. Did they ever try to run you out of town? We got arrested in New Orleans at a cemetery. They said we were grave robbing. What were you doing? Oh, just hanging around. In the 1970s, you were labeled punk, and now you're a hardcore band. In the 1970s, we were almost put in the punk category, but people couldn't understand what we were doing. Nobody knew what to make of us. We got in at the tail end of the punk movement. We were playing in the basement for a while, and the punk bands gave us the motivation to finally go out and do something. So by the time we started playing out, people were saying that we were too late, and also we were too much. We took the ideals of punk and carried them out. We were what the punk bands were going to be. It was totally all hell breaks loose. We could play and things could go wild, tables flying and stuff. Club owners couldn't handle it and started banking us. It was really good when they started getting rid of tables and having space in front of the stage because people could go crazy and not fall over all the chairs. Has the hardcore movement helped? More people are into the band now, but we're still misunderstood, especially by the political punks. They're looking at the music as, what can punk rock do to further my political beliefs? And we're looking at it as, yeah, let's have fun. Do you think that there's a different attitude among the kids that were into the music in the 70s and today? There's a big difference in the energy level between the bands and the crowd. There's people diving off the stage and singing along and just going crazy. That's what's good about hardcore. The kids get involved and have an outlet for their aggression instead of just standing there like zombies and just watching the bands they're taking part. Watching the bands they're taking apart? Watching the bands are taking part? Taking part? I don't know. I don't know what that was supposed to be. Do you look at it as a form of positive violence instead of doing something like breaking a window? I believe in violence. I'm a firm believer in any kind of violence. You have to realize that if you want to take out your violence on somebody, then they're going to have to take it out on you. Sure, you might get a wimp who will stand there and get beat up, but on the other hand, you might get somebody who'll whip out a 6-inch blade and slit your stomach open. Violence has always existed, and it's not going to go away. This is a violent society. Also in the music, for the level of energy that a band like us puts out there, it's going to be a certain amount of violence. It's aggressive music to begin with. It's not laid-back music. People are going to react to it. Glenn puts on Galaxy of Terror, and the credits come on. Oh no, Eddie Albert is in this movie. Eddie Albert. Oh, you mean the old Eddie Albert from Green Acres? It'd be worth seeing him get his head split open. Yeah, did you ever see the episode of The Outer Limits? Where Eddie Albert gets chased through the desert by killer tumbleweeds? Wasn't that cool? What? Most of the time, The Outer Limits is cool, but that episode is so stupid. You liked it? The killer tumbleweeds are upon us. What about older movies? Well, there's a lot there. Points to lobby cards on the wall. The one that I really want on video is The She Creature. I haven't seen that since they put it back in syndication. Invasion of the Saucer Man, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, all the AIP stuff is classic. The monsters are so funny. What do you think about the debate that says violence and gore is more effective if it's happening off screen and left to the viewer's imagination? I don't agree with that at all. I think you can make a very scary movie, and if you add gore in the right manner, you can make it even scarier. Evil Dead is a good example of that. A lot of people put it down for being yet another horror film, but it's not like a slasher flick. It may be a takeoff of The Exorcist and Night of the Living Dead, but it does have some very scary moments. For me to flinch during a scene with all the movies I've seen, it has to be effective. Most people who are really into horror are past the stage of actually being scared. So you watch the film and think, now she's going to the bathroom, now he'll slit her throat, or good scene, good effects, but I actually flinched once. Aren't there movies that use gore just for the sake of using gore? Sure, there's movies that use sex for sex and stupid comedy. Just look at Three's Company. Real television history is being made there every week. Just because there are movies that are bad and only put the gore in there to gross you out doesn't mean that all movies that use gore are bad. The problem is that a lot of people aren't intelligent enough to decide what's good and bad. They spend 2 hours watching a movie and then look to the critics to see if the movie was good. What about movies that are so bad they're good? Horror at Party Beach, the uncut version is really funny. Blood Feast, points to screen. Watch this part. This monster grabs the guy and holds him down and pulls the top off his head, and his brains pour out. When does Joni Cunningham get her face blown apart? That's coming up. The thing squeezes her, and all of her insides come out, and her face explodes. Bloosh! And her eyeballs shoot at the screen. It's so cool. And Howard runs out with a hefty trash bag and scoops her up. The first 2 seasons of Happy Days are great. Fonzie never talked. Richie and Potsy are jerks. And Ralph is a funny guy. My new idol is Bill Murray. I saw him in New York at a gem spa buying cigars. Was he talking like in Caddyshack in his demented Mr. Magoo voice? He's so cool. Brian Hyland is practicing to be Bill Murray, but I think I have him beat. There used to be a lot of haunted houses in New Jersey, but they're all gone. There used to be one down the street. This guy blew his brains out, and they carted the body away and condemned the building. They never cleaned up. We went in there and saw bloodstains on the floor. If you went there after dark, you would run past. A lot of haunted houses are gone today because real estate agents don't care. They just plow them down and build over them. They don't have to live there. They built right over graveyards, too. That happened at the school I went to. There's still all graveyards across the street where they built the school. They dug up all the coffins and the bones were popping out. They didn't care. So anybody that's planning on getting buried, you can imagine what's going to happen to you when there's a shortage of land. Glenn describes how he cleans skulls, cutting and cleaning away the skin and muscles and insides and boiling them on the stove. Doesn't it smell? Oh, yeah. What if some Chinese people walk by? They'll probably say, "Yum, smells good. What's cooking?" There was this Chinese restaurant that got closed down. They broke in and found all these skinned dogs and cats hanging in the back room. Do you think that war is acceptable? War is okay if it's justified. I think that there are things worth fighting for. Not everything can be settled peacefully. If everyone in the world was intelligent, then things would be settled peacefully. But unfortunately, it's not that way. Eventually, you have to resort to violence, whether you like it or not. But you can try to talk things over. Well, of course, I'm not advocating senseless violence. Try to discuss the problem, and if it doesn't work, nobody intelligent looks for fights. But if you can't talk to somebody and reason things out, then you'll have to stand up for yourself and fight. If you don't, then you're not going to be alive very long. Like, say that you own a house and somebody comes up and threatens to take all your possessions and rape your wife. What do? You can call the cops. By the time they come, you might be missing a few fingers and have a slashed throat. How does that sound? Oh, yeah. There's another thing I like to say with all this Nazi punk shit going on. I think that if communists are allowed to exist in this country, then Nazis or KKK or any other group have a right to exist also. But whether they have a right to carry out their beliefs is another matter. I don't think that anyone should be allowed to interfere with other people's rights. But they should be allowed to exist. Anybody. Nazis, KKK, Black Panthers, Grey Panthers. And when it comes to the music, you just go to shows, set aside your differences, and go crazy. So you can whip out your Nazi armband now, Jeff. What's coming out on vinyl? Evil Live is out. You have it right there in your hand. Earth AD will be out soon, and Die Die My Darling is on hold for a while until we get some money. We have a new song called Wolf's Blood, which we're going to release in Germany too, which is cool because I always wanted to do a record like that. What about videos? We did Brain Eaters and Do You Really Want to Hurt Me by Culture Club. Okay, pausing for a second as your narrator. Maybe this is the video that's being referenced in a previous interview I read out loud on this, hopefully this recording. Unless this recording is so long, I split it up into 2 episodes. Let's see. I mean, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me by Culture Club? Does that exist? Has anyone seen that? Holy I mean, obviously someone's seen that, but unless he was joking. God damn it. Now I got to pause and find out if this is available somewhere. God damn it. I can't find anything. All right. Well, let's see. The Brain Eaters video has cow brains and lamb brains in a big bowl that Robo carries out. A lot in the Boston Kids are in it. Springer from SSD, FUs, Jerry's Kids, and in the end, well, you'll see it. It's pretty funny. The brains go flying. We have a live video from our first Halloween show in 79. Some shows at Clutch Cargo, Kalamazoo, and Boston. We want to edit it together into a live documentary. Oh, man. We have some sick ideas for Devil's Whorehouse too. God damn it. If this band could have actually put out all the things they said they were going to do, like in one place at the time, like in a VHS, or that would eventually be a DVD or a Blu-ray, that would have been great. I mean, I know there's tons of stuff on YouTube, but I mean, to see the intent of the artist at the time is so much more valuable to me, to know what they would have put together. And instead we got those goofy Danzig VHS videos, like him walking around in black and white with a wolf, and Eerie Vaughn walking around a cemetery doing nothing. At least Chuck Biscuits had that Quisp cereal, segment. That was pretty great. Now it's time for more soundtrack talk, because Glenn says we were going to do a song for the Blood Feast 2 soundtrack, and I'm going to work on the soundtrack. Is the soundtrack weirder than the usual Misfits stuff? Yeah, we have a song on the new album that is like after Halloween 2. It's a lot sicker. I always like to outdo what we've done in the past, which is hard. That's why we haven't done as many new songs lately. I'll write a lot of songs, but out of them all, we've only done one or two. Are you writing a lot of weirder stuff? It's just the one song as a rule. I don't think the bands should jump off the deep end with total experimental stuff, because it might not be what the fans want. Some bands feel that they don't know anything to their fans, but they do. Not that they should write the same kind of songs forever, but you shouldn't lose sight of the people who are listening to the music. Are you going to do any more solo records? I'm going to work on something new in a few months, and this time I'll have a hand in producing it, which I didn't last time. Last time I had everything on the record, and it was 2 Misfits songs that a friend wanted to see come out. The new record will actually have a band on it. Al from Reagan Youth, maybe, Robo, and I might try to get Andy from the Necros to play guitar. What are some of your favorite movies? Anything David Cronenberg. Rabid, They Came From Within, Brood, Scanners, Videodrome, and he's working on The Dead Zone by Stephen King. There's this place that shows weird movies while you're eating dinner. What's it called? The Gore Diner? Wouldn't that be a cool place? They show splatter movies while you're eating a bloody hamburger? You'd be there every day, wouldn't you? Admit it. No, well done, only rare. Did you ever see Diner of the Living Dead? On Fridays, it's so cool. They bring out arms and legs, and the girl goes, ah! Evil Dead is good. I'm waiting for a bunch of movies to come out. Deadly Spawn, and I hear that Boogans isn't going to be released in New York. Okay, now I'm probably going to check out what Boogans was, but probably not anytime soon. I'll remember that in about 7 more days. If you helped make Boogans, please call in right now. Only thing that sucks about that interview is the shitty attitude towards Chinese people. Like, if it was a comment about it's like a specific restaurant, I think that would be hilarious. It could have been hilarious. But it's just like, what if some Chinese people walk by? And they would love it because they eat dogs and cats. Those Chinese people who are a large portion of the people in the world who gave us math and philosophy as a human race, as far as what we still draw upon. Whatever, I'm not an expert and all that stuff, but fuck, man. All right, well, it sucks to hear that stuff. Still, I don't have to sign off on it. Neither do you. Fuck that shitty attitude. And I was in a band with a guy from, from the early 2000s for a good 4 or 5 years. He worked in some kitchens and, in the Pacific Northwest, which is supposed to be, and he was such a liberal, fucking eco-minded, modern, open-minded supposed person. And he still liked to talk shit about, Chinese restaurants, they're all dirty, they're the filthiest, and it's weird. It's a weird thing that persists. I've never worked in a Chinese restaurant, so I got nothing to say, really, about what conditions may or may not be like in any given Chinese restaurant. But I know as a sane human being that not every single restaurant that prepares food in a Chinese Szechuan fashion should be judged against every other one that's ever existed. Anyway, these are the things I have to process in real time as I'm reading these. I'm reading these interviews in real time. These aren't prepped. I didn't like memorize these or do some read throughs or whatever. This is just, gross. And look, I got to say something, right? I'm not going to leave all these comments, these that are really, annoying to me just out there because I don't want to say I didn't want to cut them out. I'll say that first. I could have cut them out and pretended that the full interview was totally inoffensive in all these different regards, multiple interviews that I've read on this episode and previous ones. But that's not real. And I don't want to be fake here. And I don't want to give a fake accounting of what the Misfits are like. On the other hand, I also want you to know that like these parts of the discourse, if you call it that, between myself and the subject and myself and you, the listener, they don't come up on other episodes. I don't run into racist or homophobic comments and slurs when I'm reading interviews from Jim Morrison or Janis Joplin or Bruce Springsteen or the Go-Go's or Chuck Berry or Hank Williams or, oh my God. Like it's only in stuff like this that I have to read stuff I'm uncomfortable with. But then there's the third layer. The third layer is it doesn't make me uncomfortable like in my core because I don't relate to what they're saying and it doesn't attack me or accuse me of anything. I'm not signing off on it. I'm just presenting the past as the past. I don't like the idea that in the modern day, a lot of people seem to have this mentality that when they quote somebody or they use something as a reference, especially if it's a historical figure, they have to be like all encompassing and let everyone know that they don't endorse, something unrelated that person did. You can talk about Winston Churchill and not sign off on every political decision the dude made. I mean, I don't think we need to say we don't need to put disclaimers on everything. Like I don't have to say now I don't agree with everything the man did and said, but I don't think it's easy to deny the fact that Genghis Khan was very good at riding horses. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not signing off on all the raping and the murdering and the pillaging and the genociding the guy did. If I just say maybe he was one of the best military horsemen in history. I don't really know that. I haven't read anything about him. He was pretty great in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure when he tore up Oshman's Sporting Goods, though. But also, a fourth thing I want to point out, the Misfits, for all their talk in these interviews, they didn't seem to me to put that stuff in their music. They're not anti-gay. They're not anti-Chinese. They're not anti-black. As a band, as far as the messaging. So, they got prejudices that stem from their time and their place and their upbringing and their peer group. Too bad. Nothing I can do about it. I can just distance, the message from what I like about that band. The only thing I've read or delivered message-wise about the Misfits in this 3-episode series that I'm really still annoyed by is Bobby Steele making his comments about Glenn's earring indicating that he was a homosexual, so he didn't want to get too close to him. And I've mentioned it in the previous 2, and I'm mentioning it one more time. And here's the reason why. Everything else, I don't really care. Like I said, there are famous hip-hop artists that used lyrics and slurs against people in the 80s, 90s, 2000s that are as bad, if not worse, as these offhanded comments being made to sort of, to fill an interview or maybe to freak out an interviewer, maybe to freak out a magazine reader and whatever. And I don't care that much because it's of their time and their attitude, and they didn't put it in their songs like a lot of people that got richer and famouser that came after them. Decades after them, that used that kind of offensive, sort of othering, dehumanizing language about their fellow human beings. The Bobby Steele interview was modern day, though. The Bobby Steele interview, these guys are old men. They're not even middle-aged anymore. I'm middle-aged. I was born the year that their band basically got going, 1977. I'm middle-aged. They are old men. And if you're being interviewed about a band you were in when you were in your early 20s, And you can't laugh about that. You can't say, oh yeah, Glenn had an earring in his right ear, and I was all grossed out by the idea of being in a band with a gay guy. So, but I didn't quit. I stuck with it and found out he wasn't gay. Isn't it silly how we had those kind of ideas back then? No, because he's like a Jesus guy, and so he still wants people to know that he's not cool with homosexuals. Like he could barely stomach being in a band with it until he found out that the guy was actually straight. Like that's the one that I think is really shitty. You fucking dork, Bobby Steele. And he's probably done lots of good stuff. He's probably a decent human being in a lot of ways. And maybe people listening to this have met him or talked to him. I don't care. I'm not saying he's a shitty human being all across the board. I'm just saying he took the opportunity to say that in an interview in a very pointed way, like it was funny and cool or whatever, without just saying, we were kids, whatever. But he wouldn't have had to bring it up if he had the attitude like we were kids, whatever. He wouldn't have said it in the first place, probably. I don't know. So there we go. I hope that didn't hurt you too much in your brain, all that waffling about. But it's important to me to feel understood. And it's important for me to not leave these offensive things just dangling out there in the ears of you, my audience member, in case you fall into a category of person that would take that stuff, seriously and offensively and personally as a slight against you, and think that me, your host, was signing off on it and agreeing with it.
Oh, I'll ruin it. Like, it's embarrassing to see people put what was clearly made to be put on Netflix or HBO. It's my YouTube special. Fuck you, dude. You settled. You settled. They didn't want it. It wasn't good. So just put it out. So fuck it, Don't pay so much. What I did was very simple. I don't have any money. I have nothing. Like, I lived in a closet for like 10 years, dude. I was touring, so it made sense. And also, it's $350 a month in rent and to live in Austin. Fuck yeah, it was cheap. I can live with less. I can do that. But I still have to get some of this shit out to be able to create and move forward, because if I'm sitting on something, I just stagnate. It's the worst fucking feeling when you're creative and you can't move forward until one thing's done, because otherwise nothing would ever get done. So that was the spirit which I approached this project. My friend Josh, he was a guitar tech for We the Kings and did a lot of Vans Warped tours. He has camera gear. He was a wrestling promotions company. He filmed a lot of wrestling shows. He goes, I want to film stand-up. You have to do this. And I was like, all right, I'll do it. Yeah. So we did it the first time, and then I had to edit it all myself because, I'm a psycho. And it was right before quarantine. We recorded in December. I got sick with COVID before it was really here, and I lost like 3 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I almost died. And a lot of my friends don't even know that. I just keep that shit to myself. And then when quarantine hit, everything went shit as it did. I got in 2 fights of packs of coyotes. I saw a dead body like the first day. Like, there's so much that I cut out of the special because, and I'll just break ranks when the lady dies. It was right at that moment that I was like, oh, fuck, I got something else. I don't have a comedy special. I got something else. And so I had to film a second show afterwards, and I just did it with in mind that there was going to be pieces that I was going to use in editing because I already had it in the first take. And then my buddy Jess Castro, who is Cyclops Joe, that's an old sketch from his Comedia Go-Go group, which was this really funny Latino comedy group in the 2000s. Well, I've been laughing at this commercial forever. It's just so stupid. So I was like, hey, I just edited it in just as a stopgap in between. I was like, I really like this, Jess. Can I just use this? He started editing things. Then he started building his Twitch account, and I think he lost his fucking mind because the subject matter is very difficult to edit, and especially I wanted to chop it up. I didn't want to do the thing where you get a complete good edited special. I said no. We're going to fast cut edit it because it's on YouTube, and YouTube edits like this. We can fucking do that now. It used to be like an unwritten rule. You just film one show and it's the great show. No, they film 4 of them and they try to trick you. Fuck that. I filmed 2 and I didn't write anything down. Good luck. And in the course of editing and filming this, like I had all these things around me. Like you have to be resourceful. I'm really close friends with the Lizard Man, the world famous sideshow freak. He took me on tour to Australia. He's also a brilliant person who I want to utilize, but I don't want to. I always had an inside joke with him where it's like, listen, you're the Lizard Man and all your friends, no one really fucks with you, even though there's something funny about you. You're a man who is a fucking lizard. I can do something with that. So I got him involved, and then I figured, fuck it, we'll just set it, and I'm going to make fun of all the fucking chuds and all my friends who are obsessed with conspiracies and lizard people and all that shit. I'm just going to satirize white guy comedy. I'm going to make myself look stupid. That's way more interesting than trying to be the cool guy the way everyone else fucking does it. I'm going to be the least funny thing about my special. And it was at that point where I found out this dude named Jimmy, who used to open for me in his band before his guitars died in Iraq. He had a plane, and he was doing he had a little prop plane, and I asked my buddy Chuck, and my buddy Chuck is an improviser. I used to do a lot of underground alt shows where I would bring Chuck in and make him do all of his weird shit. I made him host an entire show dressed as Hitler, and he did improv games as Adolf Hitler throughout the entire show. It was so fucking funny. I can't describe to you how. I'm sorry. It's just Hitler doing short form improv is fucking hilarious.
Hey, friends and listeners, I just wanted to step in for a second and thank you very much for being here. Usually I wait till the very end of the episode to do this kind of stuff, but this is a hefty lift, and I feel like stopping partway through it's to give you a thanks is a little nicer right now, because it's not lost on me that right now if you're into Halloween-y shit, there's a lot competing for your attention. You could be, having a Halloween movie marathon and losing 26 hours or more of your life to all those sequels in the box set of Halloween, and then realizing only Halloween 1 was really worth your time. Unless maybe your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife just has a thing for young Paul Rudd in that 5th or 6th installment. And I know you could be listening to a lot of other podcasts right now, too. I myself, speaking of Halloween, was listening to a Lost Halloween sequels episode of Greatest Movies Never Made, I believe is the title. And boy, oh boy, Best Movies Never Made. Yeah, cool show. Despite the 3 minutes of ads at the beginning, and it's all set up by them. Some of them are their reads, and some of them are some other partner that's obviously advertising their podcast with their own voice. So these aren't like peppered throughout. Like suddenly there's a credit union commercial in the middle of a cool conversation you're listening to, like some other podcasts. So no, they put those there on purpose. They made you sit through 3 minutes. That's a lie. No one sits through any of them, and they made you skip through 3 minutes. And that's why I want to say again, thanks for giving a shit on how learning about how movies are made, or music, or bands and their history, and paying attention to this show ongoing. There's a good feeling I get from doing it, and a lot of appreciation I have in my heart for anyone that gives 2 fucks for these kinds of stories and this kind of a production. And with that, I will again remind you that there's links in the description to support what I do directly, because I've made some t-shirts. There's only one that has the logo for the show on it. I don't really care if I sell any of those. I just thought I'd put them there. But the rest of them are sort of defeatist, motivational slogans. The one I'm wearing now is the one that says, "To be creative is to be punished for every happy thought you act upon." I'm working on another one I'm thinking about doing that says something like, "When I get knocked down, I stay down. My lack of vision is my strength," that kind of thing, but the words vision and strength will be like really big and bold, so you don't see the rest until you get closer and read the actual message. Another idea I'm tossing around, I came up with today while I was in the gym, forged in failure. Maybe one that says, abandon all ambition and become useless to others so they can't ruin you. Something like that. We'll see. If any of these seem kind of cool, check out the t-shirt store or check out my Instagram, and you'll probably see new designs coming up there that'll point you towards the store eventually. Or follow the show on Twitter, at RockFilmRock on Twitter. I'm at Just the Worst Ever on Instagram.
And Chuck came out dressed as Jesus Christ. We've done all these fucked up fun shit. So this last time I was like, hey, Chuck, your name is Human Dave, the traffic slave. You live in a dystopian world. Everything is awful. It's a post-COVID world. I want people watching this as if the humanity is completely eradicated and it's run by lizard people now. And they're forcing you to do traffic reports because that was your job in the before times. Hopefully they'll get it, but if not, hopefully they'll appreciate the 8-second scene where you're in a fucking airplane for no fucking reason. We could have green screened it for sure, but it wouldn't have been as funny. Dude, one day we were up for at least 8-9 hours. I took a crew. We're gonna film lots of B footage because if I ever do a documentary, because like I have the option. I have 2-hour shows from this, and I have 2 shows before quarantine. I could have made like a before and after. There's like all this undertone. I could have talked about my friend dying of cancer thing. I could have involved that story, and there's all these different layers. It was so complex, and I'm so novice, and no one else gives a shit, that at some point I just snapped and said, fuck it. I'm taking out literally everything that was personal in this special. Like genuinely, people cried. People's lives were changed. And I'll only say it on this podcast, so I'm just getting it out here. People's lives were genuinely changed that night. There was emotional connection. There was like these deep fucking things that I did in the 2 hours that I was on stage each show. And when I was watching it, I was like, there's no fucking way this translates as well on screen as it did live. And then that made me realize, why would I put this out on screen if it doesn't feel like it did live? Maybe it's a stupid idea as artists that we're getting caught up in this content chase where we're constantly overproducing bullshit until we're stretched so thin that we fall apart. Wouldn't it be better if all our money's from the live shows? Instead of putting out a special where you get to see the material and I burn it and then now I got to write a whole new set, which I'm still going to do and still doing, what if I just hold on to that and just give you fucking content the way the fucking monkeys want? That way I don't lose out on my live shows. You want to see the live show? That's a separate fucking thing. You want to see stand-up on fucking YouTube? That's its own separate thing, and that requires different types of rules and ways of editing and cutting and presentation that should be allowed, because in the end of the day, no fucking comedy special is what stand-up actually is.
All right, friends, let's talk about the second cinematographic element of this episode. The one full movie review I'm doing is the Oblong box. Obviously, if you're a Misfits fan, you know that inspired a lyric in Die Die My Darling, a movie we covered last time. And like Die Die My Darling, I don't recommend it for anyone but someone who really loves 60s Technicolor horror from the Hammer over, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Over. It's got Christopher Lee and Vincent Price in it, yes. But both men are playing very low-key characters. It's got cool ideas. It's just not like a home run. If you're already into that stuff and you want to be sort of completist about things, I say check it out. I didn't dislike any part of it myself. I just can't recommend it for general horror audiences, and it's got some of that great Hammer stabby violence with clearly oil-based bright red paint being used for wounds. I mean, like even just like dropped on someone's bad wig for a head wound. It's so shiny and so technicolory and unbelievable. It just takes you right out of it, like any good Hammer film. But also, one of the things I like about Hammer horror is the fine ladies, and this doesn't have a hell of a lot going on there. There's a pretty exciting raunchy bawdy night out at the local tavern. If this film is any indication of how people behaved back in these olden times, when on just a regular Saturday night out while someone's being murdered upstairs, people were getting it on, man. They're getting their freak on, and just right there while a fiddler plays along with a dude with a squeeze box or an accordion throwing down some jams. Wild stuff. But unlike something that I think is a little, I can actually have more fun with and simultaneously slightly take a little more seriously story-wise, like Captain Kronos Vampire Hunter, which has the gorgeous Caroline Munro in it and a few other pretty ladies. This one doesn't even have that going on. It's not fun or funny and doesn't have a lot of good-looking people. If you're into guys, Vincent Price in this one seems like he's in his 60s. He's very low energy, and the pancake makeup on his face is a bit much. At least on the version I found on YouTube, there's a very nice, very well-defined cut of this on the YouTube, so you can check out. It's a cool horror plot with a cool sort of shock ending, and I won't talk too much about it. You can sort of check out the plot yourself, but it's got some classic elements, but it was some voodoo thrown in, which is a bit of a curveball for this genre of film in this era. I realize I don't talk a lot about attractive women in many of the movies that I cover because there aren't a lot of rock and roll movies with attractive women and that are built around attractive. I mean, the Runaways film, they're like teenagers. They're the tiny little girls. And I couldn't really get too into that. But I realize I've said a lot more about dudes like Michael Paré and the two movies I've covered there. And like Vincent Price in previous episodes talked about what's in it for you if you're into guys like Vincent Price. In this one, he is neither dashing and energetic, nor is he villainous and intimidating. He's just kind of concerned a lot and worried a lot and surprised a lot. And then he rushes around a little bit here and there, has very tender conversations with his wife-to-be, who's at least half his age. It's just... In a movie this old depicting a way of life this old, that doesn't bug me as much as it bugs me in modern day films still to this day. They're still doing that. But maybe this is just a good indicator for me that I really need to get to that Josie and the Pussycats episode I've been threatening to do for a long time. Oh, Rachel Lee Cook, you adorable, adorable, age-appropriate woman for me. Not to mention Rosario Dawson. And also Tara Reid, for those of you that are into that. You Carson Daly or Dan Tyson types. One last element of the Oblong box. It is a Poe picture, and I would say it's probably one of the weakest of the Poe pictures. And these are films made by American International or Hammer or whomever at whatever time that were using the title of an Edgar Allan Poe story, and then the plot bears no resemblance whatsoever to an Edgar Allan Poe story as written by any man ever named Edgar Allan Poe. But some of them are brutal as hell and fantastic. I would check out Vincent Price in things like Fall of the House of Usher if you want to get started in some of those. All right, so this is not one of those deep dives like I did with 3 consecutive episodes of Maximum Overdrive, although those weren't consecutive. I had a break in the middle of those. There's just not enough, craziness on the set to talk about or struggles through development hell to talk about. It's a fine piece of film to have on maybe when you're hanging out with friends or just having a night in, doing some laundry, doing some cross stitch. I recommend it for folks that have already seen a few Hammer horror films or similar. There's definitely nothing that happens in this film that directly influenced any lyrics in any Misfits songs. Besides, your future is in an oblong box. And in the case of the film, it's not even a woman who's going into the oblong box. And in fact, it's a person coming out of the oblong box. So that's not where their future is. I've said too much already. More Misfits stuff coming up, big time, especially the big legal struggles between the band members throughout the 90s.
There's so much that I didn't put in the special that was just like way too personal. And if it's my live show, it's like, how about I just keep working on this and then put out this because this is fun and goofy and silly instead of taking itself too serious. So that was the spirit of it. The audio, I made the mistake of just, I didn't mix the audio up front with every camera angle and all the mic checks. So I just poured myself into it. And so, in redoing it, two things happened. We redid the audio, but it wasn't great, and it sounds kind of foreign when you see it on the video because my voice is so direct in the mic. What we've noticed is that there is an ASMR quality to lo-fi recordings. I love lo-fi. And so in the spirit of lo-fi, I took the camera that was closest to me and I'm slowly raising up. I'm just using that volume for what you heard. But for the final mix, I'm mixing the camera with the mic so that you can get kind of like this 3D effect, kind of like those old 70s Rodney Dangerfield albums. Like they weren't recorded very well, but you felt like you were in the audience because of the mic placement and his voice. It's a stand-up comedian. We're not doing fucking music. You need to understand the words, but the noise and the crackle and the where the laughs are, that all puts you in place. So if you close your eyes, you can kind of be in that zone, which is why I went black and white, because if you see too much, if there's too much busyness going on, stand-up exists in the brain. You're thinking of the words that's going on. If you're watching someone who's too pretty and posing and dancing and doing all that shit, well, their words are probably shit. There's feelings that come with all that. And because I was going for the horror fame, I went with the intense ones. I cut out all the ones that made me look sane and rational. And then I scored the music because I'm a musician first. And it was a perfect opportunity. And I was exploring, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this kind of feel like John Carpenter. So I'm going to do weird synthy John Carpenter stuff. And then that ended up turning into Italian. I don't know, man. I wrote 200 songs in the course of 2 years developing this idea and found the right tones and put it together just to make it feel like you're just a 13-year-old dopey fat kid watching late night TV on the USA Network, except it's in a world filled with lizard people and nothing is good. That
made me laugh when I revisited this interview. I even put something up on Instagram of me laughing at that and playing it into the microphone. I really, really enjoyed talking to Jay Whitecotton. You probably can't really gauge that too accurately because I've cut out all my own elements of the conversation. I really didn't feel like I needed to have me talking or setting up any of these bits in this case. I mean, you've been listening to me talk through most of this episode and every episode. So I wanted his words and reactions to stand on their own. There's a little bit more left, but I realized I haven't really talked much about the special. I just wanted to say that I thoroughly enjoyed what he did with all the elements he put together to make this such an enjoyable and kind of original experience, especially after the pandemic and having seen what other comedians did, slicker production with, YouTube and hoping to get picked up by something else and then not getting picked up by something else, and watching what they did on social media for the last few years. It kind of grossed me out after a while. And here's this guy that's, doing something in his own community and promoting creativity, promoting a little bit something more daring with himself and pushing himself harder to try different things in a club of kind of his own making and in an environment of his own making, plus the crazy stuff that they did outside the basics of the special that were intercut. Jay Whitecotton himself has this cagey sort of wild look when he's up there, but he's not being, I'm a wacky guy and I'm gonna get in your face, man. It's more like the wild kind of unpredictability of a Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers mixed with sort of the cagey, steely control of Neil Fallon from Clutch. I think that's something in the eyes. There's something in the eyes with those three men that I think that bonds them together. And I'm not washing his balls here because I don't think he listens to either of those bands. I probably listens to the Butthole Surfers. But we didn't talk about that. We talked about Tom Waits and the Beatles. There's a big Beatles conversation. I'm going to put some of those together in the next month or so, since it's not as time sensitive or related to the special. And those are going to go on YouTube. So please check the description of this episode for a link to my YouTube page. And, if you want to know about that kind of shit that doesn't just go into the podcasts, check that out. I'm probably going to do a live read of Stephen King's story or two, like I have done the last 2 Halloweens in a row. And if you need stuff to have on Halloween weekend, check those out or wait for the new one. One last thing about the Misfits, a Misfits tidbit, if you will. I finally found out what the deal was with Blank Records. I know I've repeated the fact a couple times, last episode and this episode, and probably and definitely on the first episode, that the fellas wanted to make an album and they used studio time instead of money out of a settlement with the folks who had purchased or were trying to purchase the name Blank Records for themselves. Well, it turns out Blank was a subsidiary or to be a subsidiary of Mercury Records. So part of the gamble for these guys requesting studio time as payment instead of cash was there's an option for Mercury to pick up the Misfits and release Static Age. And that was not picked up. Mercury heard the mixes, didn't really think there was anything they could do with them, and so let the band move on. And the action that made this all happen was the release of a Per Ubu album on Mercury's Blank Records. They had actually already gone that far with no knowledge of Glenn Danzig's own record label. For whatever reason, that news just didn't reach them. And when they chose not to pick up the record, then that sort of left the Misfits with their own control of the master tapes. And while they probably didn't have the cachet to release a full album on their own and package it and try to get distribution and whatever, they could at least, parse that first album out into singles and short-term releases and build a following that way and communicate directly with their audience and sell directly to their audience on a smaller scale that is a little more manageable for an up-and-coming band like that.
There's a magic to live performance, and it's the one thing that I'm pretty good at when it happens, because I'm so used to dysfunction and violence and abuse. I don't react to it the way normal people react to it. So in the moment when it happened, I remember looking over, and here's what's happening in that whole scene. In that whole scene, there's a fight going on. One, someone's hurt. And I actually feel terrible about that. I don't like that. I don't want anyone to feel pain, especially at my comedy show. I mean, unless they're being a little twat about it, that's different, but I don't want someone physically hurt. And at the time that I was going into that scene, it was a very, there was a lot going on. I thought this lady was mad, and I thought, oh, great, cancel culture is real. I fucking thought this thing was stupid, It's only real because you guys pretend it's fucking real. It's like fucking Bitcoins. It doesn't actually exist. It's a faith-based system, just like American currency. So I'm dealing with that, and I'm like, okay, well, make sure, okay, I know we're filming and stuff like that. I can make this funny, but also don't be too funny. I love tragedy. If you throw me in a if there's an accident, I'm the one diving in to pull out some bodies. It's just this fucking instinct I have. But it's also the death, the gallows humor. When that kicks in, when they asked for a trash can, it was everything I can do not to be like, what, you should probably recycle her at the very, there was so many just jokes that they were giving me, and I was in this point where I'm like, well, I got to finish the special. There's cameras going. I got to be funny. But if I get too, like, it was like just a confluence of all those things. And as a director in mind, I was like, oh, I'm just going to lean into this. I'm going to lean into this because the one, I can't say that because I don't want to give away something in the special, but there's a lot of secret little codes in there. There's lines at certain cuts that I put in place on on certain reasons to give you to feeling of suspense. So if you watched it again, you go, he's telling us this is going to happen.
Now, I'm finally going to make good on all my teasing and follow through with what I said I was going to do many times, last episode and this episode, which is to get into the legal wranglings of the Misfits. And I personally find them fascinating, as old as I am, and having read as many things as I've read from other artists, what they've gone through legally, having to, fight their own record labels, their own management for the money they are rightfully owed, and comparing that to the infighting with this band is interesting because I was so naive as a younger person when I got into the Misfits, just towards the end of high school or middle of high school. I didn't really consider the possibility that, punk bands like this would be embroiled in years and years and years of legal battles against each other. And also when I bought the Misfits box set as my sort of first introduction to their work after I had heard Walk Among Us, because a friend at school let me borrow her tape, which is funny because that's the only piece of work that's not included in the box set. I didn't realize that was a legal thing because Ruby or Slash Records owned that and Caroline owned everything else by the time the box set came out. I was naive enough to not understand, like, why are there so many different, like the same title songs are on this box set a million times? Because some of them were recording sessions from the early days. Like there's a couple different versions of Cough Cool or She, maybe Glenn's just playing keyboard through a fuzz distortion pedal or something like that on one or two of those examples. But I didn't realize that there was, the Legacy of Brutality version of one song was not the same as the Static Age version of that song until quite a while later. I mean, I didn't understand production, and I was young enough to not really be able to pick apart the difference between those. I assumed there was a different recording session involved, but I didn't really know the story behind why. I also didn't get that, like, well, Collection 1 and Collection 2, and then there's Static Age, but why is the Static? I didn't know Static Age had never come out at that point. Anyhow, it's similar to what I learned about the Beatles with the anthology, that came out in the early mid 90s. They had to do a lot of legal stuff to tie up a lot of loose ends in order to put out the anthology box set and the home video thing that they did. They had to sue themselves inside Apple Corp. Like Apple had to sue the Beatles or something like that, or the Beatles had to sue Apple. It was their company. And to consolidate all these things that they had started and never finished, or consolidate different legal wings of, irony, wings, or different, extensions of their individual and collective artistic endeavors as Beatles, as they were breaking up and as they continued on into their own solo projects, but kind of kept the Apple Music banner flying over a lot of their other stuff. The Misfits couldn't reform as a band without Glenn Danzig, and Glenn Danzig couldn't move on financially until a lot of old hash got settled in court.
Being on this podcast, this is the one I wanted to do. You're a musician. You have a value set mindset. I knew this would be the easiest conversation to have.
I didn't realize what a revelation the box set was because I didn't understand that a lot of these things had been released as singles. I thought they were like any other band. You put out an album at a time, even if you're a punk band in the 80s. I thought just like, no, they weren't. They were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 songs at a time, doling these things out to their fans directly from their hands into a mailer into someone's mailbox. So it didn't really occur to me that, okay, this is the first digital collection CD wise of all these things together in one place. The whole legacy, as it were, is there. But a lot of this had to be put off for a while. Glenn had to buy some time because he had other projects that had to come out first while he still, physically, in some cases, retained control over the Misfits music. He was working hard on his other endeavors, his other projects, touring, merchandising, putting bands together, changing things around and releasing albums, and then trying to do Misfits collections all by himself, the way he wanted to hear them, and for fans that, didn't have a shot at getting their hands on the early vinyl. Well, this whole coming together of the other former Misfits members legally puts him under a lot of strain and stress, timeline-wise, because if they get their way, all this stuff's going to come out the way that they want it, and if he doesn't fight them enough, he'll probably lose a bit of that control, because in the courts at the time in the 80s and 90s, a lot of judges still just sort of ruled in favor of the overall, conglomeration of band members that were involved in a musical identity of a time. So, they were not the kind of judges you're going to get stuck with ruling on something like this are probably not going to be experts in music publishing and in ownership of creative rights, especially when you're just like a bunch of scrappy juvenile delinquents from the 70s who didn't have, a ton of documentation or contracts or things saying, okay, you're going to get this forever and I'm going to get this forever. And we're going to be a band for, these recordings are going to go on and on and on. They didn't know I'm sure they didn't think they'd be able to have these out on a label in the late 90s. It's 1977, 78, 79 to 81, 82, 83-ish. All those years, they're just cranking out vinyl in small batches and living off of it. But now, if anyone was thinking that far ahead into the future, it's Glenn. Glenn's the guy that's composing the stuff. Glenn's the guy that had the idea to get a band together. And he's not the one, like Jerry, or he's not like Jerry and Doyle, basically, who are constantly going through this cycle of purchasing equipment and smashing it on the regular. That's one of the reasons Glenn quit the band. He was fed up with their shenanigans on stage, just wasting money and smashing shit up like they were a big arena rock band and being stupid. Like he thought it was really fucking dumb. And clearly what he wanted to do was weirder anyways. If you listen to Sam Hain, it's pretty drastically different from any of the Misfits stuff. If you're into that, if you play it for a person that's never listened to any of these kind of forms of music, they're just gonna hear something noisy and creepy, and it's probably all gonna sound the same to them. To the people who like nuclear assault sounds just as much like any other heavy metal band as name a Megadeth. But why would you be in that scenario with that person anyway? I don't know. Maybe it's a first date and you're looking to ruin it. Now, the beginning of this is Legacy of Brutality, the first compilation of Misfits songs, technically, and it was released in 1985 in September. I used to assume this was just like a collection. There was Legacy of Brutality, Collection 1, Collection 2, and then there was a box set that had them all in it, and I didn't guess that it was just Static Age, which had never been released, but not with the original tracks that were recorded on it. But if you were buying record albums in 1985 and you liked what you had heard of the Misfits, or you were curious about the Misfits, or you're in a record store that sells punk stuff, and you see this cover and you've heard of the Misfits maybe through other people, or you've seen t-shirts or something, who knows? It's gotta be interesting enough for you to want to, if you just read the the track listing, the song titles on the back, if that's your shit, you're buying this and you're assuming this is like all the Misfits you need after you've heard Walk Among Us, and or Earth AD, depending on what you think of that kind of a sound of the Misfits. And this is like, oh, crazy that they started here and then they got a little more refined with, Walk Among Us, and then more thrash metal-y, more like kind of nasty, almost like a much, I don't know. I don't want Venom fans to get pissed at me, but like I think it sounds like a much better version of Venom in some places. But who knows? I'm trying to put myself in a time machine. Like if I was a teenager back then, that's probably what I would think. But I wouldn't really question what the origin of this was besides, hey, it's a collection of Misfits songs that I haven't been able to hear before. Well, it turns out it was curated by Glenn Danzig for Caroline Records, an indie label in New York City that had, just a few months before its release, signed a distribution deal with Danzig and Plan 9 Records. So he's had Plan 9 under his control, obviously, from very early on. Now, it's mostly the unreleased stuff from Static Age that people didn't hear in an album form. They probably, earlier fans could have bought certain songs from Static Age, obviously, depending on what was available to them via mail order to the band. But, a lot of Misfits diehards even then didn't know about songs like Spinal Remains and American Nightmare. But it pissed off a few people who heard it when it came out and decided, this doesn't quite sound like what I think it should sound like. Because it turns out Glenn Danzig had spent the necessary time to make it sound more like he wanted to, which is to say he remixed the material from Static Age his own way and recorded his own guitar tracks on a ton of the songs. And I believe Eerie Vaughn was conscripted to play bass on some of those tracks as well. Definitely something that rankled people was that he didn't credit any Misfits except for himself on the album liner notes. Soon after this, Metallica is going to put out the Garage Days revisited EP. The first revisited EP was sort of it wasn't an EP. It was like a single for Creeping Death. And then side 2 of that was, two covers of new wave British heavy metal songs. But this was their little more diverse tribute to some bands that had influenced them. And that ended up having 2 Misfits songs, Last Caress and then Green Hell. Now, I'll read a little bit straight from the text of James Green Jr.'s book. Because this is sort of what sets up the renewed interest in the band, especially from a younger generation that's grown up with heavy metal and Metallica, kind of getting them into the Misfits music, especially, Cliff Burton having the tattoo on his arm of the Crimson Ghost until obviously he died. Well, obviously he had the tattoo after he died still, but he wasn't there wearing the shirts on stage, to like show kids, what one of his biggest influences was. Now I'm reading from the text. None of that was James Green Jr. That was just me waffling. Okay. Suddenly, more and more devotees were swirling out of the Caiafa brothers in the rolling hills of Vernon, New Jersey, professing their love for Misfits and begging for any trinkets left over from the glory days. Jerry only knew Danzig might prove a potentially valid source for promotional Misfits merchandise to help satiate the growing number of fans, but the bassist was wary of reaching out after such a bitter dissolution. Exercising some degree of caution, only contacted a mutual friend to ask for a box or 2 of T-shirts from Glenn. The response was not friendly. Glenn said that if we want shirts, we should go out and buy them. Only recalled in 1989. I paid for half of the records that are ours from my pocket. Sorry, that was a little awkward. I paid for half of the records that are ours from my pocket. I was laying out cash left and right. Now I don't see why the dude has to turn to me and say, buy this stuff. A year prior, Caroline Records had released Misfits, and I think this might be what becomes collection number 1, like retitled later. Another assembly of recordings compiled by Danzig that spanned the group's entire existence. In October of 1987, the Misfits concert disc Evil Live, previously an exclusive item via the Misfits Fiend Club fan organization, was also distributed by Caroline Records. From these 2 releases and Legacy of Brutality, only Glenn Danzig was receiving royalties, which were also on a steady rise thanks to Metallica's unexpected endorsement. Danzig also, of course, benefited financially from Garage Days' worldwide sales, as this his was sole songwriting credit. Right. So every time they sell one of those records, he's getting paid publishing money because the man wrote the stuff and did his homework when it came to, making sure he had his business, worked out. Let's see. These factors, combined with the T-shirt insult, spurred Jerry Only and his brother to take definitive action. At first, the Caiaphas wanted to avoid any costly legal entanglement, contacting Danzig directly about the royalty situation. Only later claimed that Danzig offered his former bandmates $13,000, a paltry sum considering the perceived monies flowing into Glenn's pockets. The Caiaphas allegedly countered with a $250,000 settlement sum, which Danzig quickly rejected. Unsure of their next move, Jerry and Doyle temporarily distracted themselves with a brand new musical venture. And this is where the narrative goes into Christ the Conqueror, which we've covered in the previous Misfits episode. And we're going to, jump around that and move on to some other exciting stuff. Let's look at the Misfits timeline, which is a little more, what's the word? What's the word for brevity? It's got more brevity. It's a little more direct and sort of to the point. So if we just look at their timeline around 85, Gem and the Holograms comes out. And if you want to hear more about Gem and the Holograms, check out one of my episodes from about a month or two ago with the Go-Go's and Gem and the Holograms. And there's obviously an evil band that is the counterpoint for the good girls in Gem and the Holograms. The evil band is called the Misfits. One thing I didn't bring up in that episode of the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, because I didn't know this was a thing, was toy company Hasbro released dolls of members of both bands, each accompanied by a cassette of music by the character's band. Jerry Only eventually talked to Hasbro about the use of the name The Misfits, but a legal loophole allowed the series to continue to use it. Mysteriously, the Misfits were replaced for most of the cartoon's final season by a different rival band called the Stingers. And this is also an element in Jerry Only's drive to take back control as much as he could of the Misfits name. Because the fact that this major corporation didn't have to pay any band members compensation for using the name The Misfits for a band, I think really got under his skin, because Hasbro blatantly just came out and said, we have no idea you existed. And to him, that was unacceptable. And this is mostly me sort of speculating on the details of what's going on in someone else's head, which is, clearly not verifiable. But it does make me laugh a little bit to think about him going to Hasbro with his hand out and them saying, no, we don't know who you are, go home. And him going, okay. And then going, well, if I can't sue them, I can fucking sue Glenn Danzig. I don't blame him for trying either one, quite frankly. Really, I've been hard on I've been hard on Jerry when it comes to his choice of words and interviews and stuff and things he said in the past, especially about Glenn and about the Misfits. I think a lot of things he said were inaccurate and or full of shit. But I kind of don't blame him for wanting to go after Glenn for a piece of the pie, because they did put a lot of, put a lot of sweat into that band. And it's one of those things that keeping all those royalties to himself, Glenn was being pretty unwise and needlessly selfish when that Metallica money started rolling in. In my opinion, I think you could do the boys a solid back in New Jersey and say, okay, let's, I don't have to have everything. People are buying the stuff. Maybe we'll put out the other versions with your tracks on it instead of my tracks or whatever. But if I redub them the way I want, I'm keeping the money for Legacy Brutality. I think that's justified. Anyways, it just reminds me of early 2000s comedy about George W. Bush. Hang in there, kids. This won't take long. I remember the Chappelle Show sketch about if he was the president and he's having a press conference and they're bugging him about the whole WMDs not really being there in Iraq and us invading Iraq under false pretenses. And he's like, that man tried to kill my daddy. Don't you talk that way. I'm going to get him. Like, basically, like, saying, most of us in America kind of feel for you. Like Saddam Hussein did try to assassinate your dad, and I'd want to get him too. Just admit that that's what you're doing here instead of deflecting us away from the guys that really pulled off 9/11. And then Lewis Black said something similar. It's like, your job as the president is to make me hate the prick enough to be okay with you invading their country. And you didn't do that. The guy had his people attack us, and you basically came around and went, well, I can't get that guy, but I can sure as hell get this son of a bitch instead. So we're going to fucking invade Iraq instead of going after, the Taliban. Because it was too hard to go after the Taliban in a way that would produce instant results. Obviously, history being what it was, it took quite a few years. Anyhow, that's not the details aren't the point. The comparison and the metaphor is the point. What I'm really, really saying here with the metaphor is that Hasbro Incorporated is Osama bin Laden in this case. But Glenn Danzig is Saddam Hussein in this case, if you're Jerry only. I think that makes perfect sense. Now, how cool would this have been to hear live? May 13th, 1986, WHRB 95.3 FM radio in Cambridge, Massachusetts broadcast the All Hell Breaks Loose radio show hosted by Tang Records owner Curtis Casella. The playlist included 2 hours of Misfits music, a live phone interview with Glenn Danzig, and the previously unavailable Return of the Fly. Bootleg releases with Return of Fly began appearing soon afterward. Right before that, like a week before that, Danzig has finished compiling the tracks for Collection 1, which is released by Caroline Records a few months later. Now, after that, Glenn Danzig in August gets together with Eerie Von, goes to Real Platinum Studio, and records alternate versions of several Misfits songs because Walk Among Us had been released on Ruby and Slash Records. Ruby's a subsidiary of Slash. Danzig planned to use new and previously unreleased versions of Walk Among Us tracks on a proposed Plan 9 Records release entitled Walk Among Us 2. He later dropped the idea, releasing the alternative tracks on Collection 2. That I never knew about at all. So it's like, okay, all right. So the versions on the Misfits box set were basically the songs from Walk. This is what confused me. Because there's songs from Walk Among Us, but Caroline Records didn't have access or the legal right to release the Walk Among Us tapes on their box set. So how did these get on there? It was re-recordings by Eerie and Glenn. I hope Eerie gets money from those. I mean, he deserves so much money for everything he did for Danzig and the Misfits for so long. Let's see. Then we'll skip over Christ the Conqueror. Second printing of issue 5 of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comes out with a story entitled Ghoul's Night Out, which was dedicated to the Misfits. Now, I have an issue with this, and the issue is I don't own this, and that makes me very upset. It turns out that issue 5, the version that was originally released in the first printing, doesn't contain this story. It was included in reprints. So I have the first 4 hardcover collections of, Eastman and Laird's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Ultimate Collection. As a kid, I only had a few copies of individual issues of the comics and then some graphic novels that were reprinted in color for people that like me that were just buying what we could at Walden Books or whatever at the time. So this is story and art by Eric Talbot in 1987. 87 would have been a couple years after the original printing of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 5. And if you look up TMNT Ghoul's Night Out, you will get an entry that's featured prominently in the top of the Google results from the nostalgiaspot.com. Nostalgiaspot has written up a lot of cool stuff over the last couple of years that I've kind of pounced on for curiosity's sake to figure out things, track stuff down, maybe use as references and stuff like that. And I'll include a link in the description to this one. And the entry, when it gets going, says, when Mirage Studios started to gain recognition thanks to the success of the TMNT comic book, founders Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman needed to hire more staff in order to churn out material in a reasonable amount of time. One of those hired was artist Eric Talbot, a former classmate of Kevin Eastman's, and apparently a fan of rock, metal, and punk music. One of Talbot's earliest assignments was composing short stories for supplemental books and reprints of the original run of comics, which is how we ended up with the story Ghouls Night Out. Ghouls Night Out was included in the reprint issue number 5 of TMNT, printed in November of '87. This is actually a pretty noteworthy issue of TMNT, as it contains a special announcement in the middle of the story which officially blows the lid on the licensing deal Laird and Eastman had made with Mark Friedman. Included in the announcement are details about the Playmates toys and its first wave of TMNT action figures due out in 1988, as well as the announcement of the animated mini-series, which was set to premiere the following month. This was the first time fans of the property were introduced to Bebop and Rocksteady and read the name Krang. There's even a double-page ad that follows the inaugural lineup of Turtle toys. Pretty cool. Ghouls Night Out follows the main story and is 8 pages of mostly art. In it, a turtle, most fans seem to assume it's Donatello because he carries a spear at one point, but he could be any of the 4. Is patrolling a graveyard at night, and when monsters descend on him, he's forced to run for his life from the zombies, Frankenstein's monster, a wolfman, Nosferatu, and others. Most of the Universal monsters basically get to make an appearance. The story ends when the turtle wakes up in April's apartment, having fallen asleep watching a monster movie marathon on television. So I bring it up because it's another one of these things that ties in with the legal weirdness, or maybe this decision is separate from the legal weirdness. I don't know. But the title sort of page of this little short story says Ghouls Night Out in a, big, heavy, drippy kind of font. And the turtle in question is in the graveyard, and he's got one arm leaning over a gravestone that says October 31st, 1983, R.I.P. Special thanks to the Misfits, with the Misfits kind of logo drawn in there. But later on in the story, there's a lot of other, this all takes place in the graveyards. There's tons of gravestones, which is always a chance for artists to put inside jokes in people's names and things like that. And there's tombstones that feature the names Jerry Only, Robo, Doyle, and Danzig at one point. And then there's other artist references later on. Metallica can be found on some headstones on page 2. The entire staff of Mirage Studios. Frank Frazetta, quite a shout out there. And then the article also shows a black and white source for the same original picture with the tombstone that said Misfits, and it says special thanks to Glenn Danzig instead. But the author of this blog post notes that the colored reprints of the story kept the Misfits name on the gravestone. So, by the way, the author's name is listed as Joe, nothing else.
The comedians aren't. They're trying to posture as their idea of what they think a professional is supposed to be. Everyone's doing the fake it till you make it because the money has been industrialized out of this. It used to be a club system. That doesn't exist anymore because you're not developing features. When Seinfeld was fucking doing comedy, he could do 13 spots a night in New York. And if you lived in New York, it made fucking sense to do stand-up comedy in New York because you're doing all the clubs, you're getting on for people. And if you apply yourself and you build and write your material instead of just relying on the same shit, you'll get so good so fucking fast. You need to be on stage in repetition. But the industry has stolen that from us and turned it into a karaoke business, basically, where the host, when the host stopped doing this one thing. When you hosted comedy shows, you would produce a show. You'd ask the comics that you wanted to be on the show that you liked, that you thought would reflect the audience you were going to pull in, and then you promoted and got the audience in, and that's how you got your worth. And as you developed your act, you could make connections and succeed at this to an extent. Well, those hosts stopped promoting to the audience and now only exclusively promote to open micers to do the sets. So that's karaoke. I was a karaoke host. It's the same fucking thing. You call a bunch of people to get their 3-minute shines on so that the drink sales are good and that you can make $150 at best.
Now, something else I didn't know about the late 80s and the Misfits is that I'm assuming, feeling emboldened by the new attention on their former band, Jerry and Doyle appear in Misfits gear at the Creation Convention at the Penta Hotel in New York City, and later went to Tower Records for an autograph signing, along with their drummer, The Merp, or The Murph, I'm not sure. During the interview, or an interview, I guess, at that appearance, Jerry talked about a royalties lawsuit against Glenn Danzig for the first time. Asked by a Yes Zista interviewer if there was a court case, he responded, "We're trying to settle out of court." Now, as far as the Misfits timeline website's concerned, there's nothing involved in the court stuff happening for the next few years. And then several former band members in 1994, around March, and we're talking Jerry Only, Doyle, Robo, and Franche Coma, and their lawyer met with Glenn Danzig and his lawyer to discuss a settlement. 5 months later, almost after a year of rumors, Jerry Only announces for the first time the Misfits will be getting back together. He says, what it boils down to is we are in the process of settling with Glenn, and the way it looks, we will be able to play as the Misfits. So we are looking for a singer. And I'll get into more of the legal stuff that was going on, but I want to go to the next note. Jerry and Doyle in October 94 overdubbed new guitar and bass tracks onto the live recording that I guess they'd had laying around from December 20th, 1978. This was a Max's Kansas City sort of Christmas appearance of some kind. It was submitted to Caroline Records for release. Jerry later said in an interview for a Swedish publication, Close Up, number 22, I had a cassette which was recorded during a concert from 77 or 78 where we played Blue Christmas. The instruments were badly recorded, but Glenn's vocals were awesome, so we went to Lodi and recorded the music again. Caroline Records later canceled the album, see August 29, 1995. And that'll be coming up in a sec. So then, January 1st, 1995, the out-of-court settlement involving the Misfits, Glenn Danzig, and Caroline Records allowed Jerry Only and Doyle to perform and record as the Misfits, effective immediately. As part of that settlement, Plan 9 Records ceased to exist. Jerry explained the outcome in Metal Maniacs, June 96. We are the exclusive owners of the name on a performing level. We share the joint rights to the name with Glenn for merchandising. Now, my sort of understanding of the merchandising split is that if you buy a shirt and on the tag it says copyright Cyclopean Records, it's the Misfits, brand. That's the money going into Jerry's and Doyle's pocket, or whoever's on that end of the non-Danzig side. And then I believe it's Evil Live Music copyright on the tag of merchandise you buy. That means it's going into Glenn's pocket. Now get this. April 25th, 1995. Knowing that Danzig had an upcoming concert in New Jersey, Jerry and Doyle stopped by Danzig's parents' house in Lodi to invite him to return to the Misfits. They are also there, according to the book, sniffing around for any old bits of merch or trinkets or whatever. And according to Misfit Central, it's Danzig's mom. According to James Green Jr., it's Danzig's dad. But the result is one of them or both of his parents told the boys that, he's got a bunch of old skateboard parts under the back deck. And I don't think he was going to do anything with them. Well, he was hiding them there to drive up the scarcity of those skateboards that had Sam Hain graphics on them. And they had originally been advertised in Thrasher magazine in April 87. Jerry and Doyle took all those parts and sold the skateboards, and then came back a few weeks later to pick up the remaining 10 cases of more skateboards. But we're told that Danzig had at that point sold the rest. So as part of the settlement, Danzig sells master tapes of all the recording sessions and albums that he'd been hoarding to Caroline Records in the summer of 95, who immediately plans a special, release of all these different things that don't really quite come to fruition. because Glenn's got plans of his own for releasing collection number 2, and he threatens to sue Caroline Records if they don't. He'd been working on that thing since 1987. Also, he's unhappy with the overdubs on Max's Christmas that Jerry and Doyle did, so he decides to postpone the release of the Static Age album through Caroline and instead release collection 2. Now, to once again go back to James Green Jr., there's a lot of great material here, and I'm not even blowing this for you if you haven't read his book yet. There's a ton of great stuff in this book, and it's not even, it's not even a heavy lift as far as the number of pages. That's what I like about this guy. There's so much detailed information. There's a little bit of his own, sly attitude in there, but not like a guy like Mick Wall or Danny Sugarman that just sort of goes off on their own fucking tangents and just decides to just have little imaginary flights of fancy to fill pages. So we'll pull the discussion back a few years with Jerry Only doing this big, huge interview called All Hell Breaks Loose. It was his opportunity to talk up the whole Chris the Conqueror thing and commenting that Glenn Danzig's problem is he's living off his Misfits fame. He's in his own shadow, and he don't even know it. The author says, this is a massively ironic statement given the fact that at this very juncture, Only was suing Glenn Danzig partially to gain ownership of the Misfits copyrights, ostensibly, so he would have the authority to reform the Misfits without their original singer, if that was his want. Most involved in this erupting legal Donnybrook were more concerned with the song publishing / royalty aspect of the fight, though. Negotiations between the Caiafa and Anzalone, I'm not sure, that's Glenn's last name, parties dragged on as the specific value of the Misfits was something neither side could agree on, nor could they agree on who deserved what royalties. Up until this point, every Misfits song was credited entirely to Glenn Danzig. Was that true? Was Glenn responsible for every single note and nuance of the music? If so, did the players deserve compensation for their specific performances, even if they had no hand in the actual songcraft? Insiders did not anticipate a swift, tidy conclusion to this litigious disagreement. A lengthy, messy trial seemed imminent. Finally, in late 1994, Caroline Records made a decision that spared both parties any elongated court time. And I wanted to go into this part of the book because he details it so well. Like, look, it's not as simple as they went to court and then they settled and then Caroline puts out the box set. It's Caroline steps in and takes a pretty big financial risk because they don't have a lot of heavy hitters on their roster bringing in a lot of money right now. By this time, I, as a teenager, had certainly purchased the Caroline Records release of White Zombie's Make Them Die Slowly, but that's because I was a fan of Los Exorcisto Devil Music Volume 1, and I was waiting around for something to come out, before Astro Creep was eventually released, and I went back to that album. I found it at a, really cool music store in my neighborhood, but that wasn't necessarily the kind of thing that you would find at a lot of mega stores. We didn't have a ton of mega stores. That you might not find it at the mall. Maybe you would, depending on the town you're in, but I don't know how good Caroline's distribution was when it came to pushing this 1988/89 White Zombie album that doesn't really sound anything like Los Exorcisto. It's just drenched in reverb and echo, and it's not mixed well. The riffs aren't as good. It's a different guitarist. It's not Jay Younger. Anyway, sorry, folks. I'm getting back to it. This is my way of, not just reading straight from a page for uninterrupted periods of time. The label purchased the complete rights to the Misfits recording for $1.5 million, allocating Glenn Danzig the money needed to reach settlement. The action allowed the warring Misfits to breathe easier and specifically helped Danzig avoid a costly trial that more than likely would have forced him to acquiesce a significant percentage of songwriting credits and publishing rights. Historically, courts view musical acts as collaborative efforts and tend to rule as such. 2 years earlier, a U.S. federal court ruled in favor of 2 former members of Frankie Lyman's group, the Teenagers, who claimed they had co-written Lyman's 1956 doo-wop hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? The fact that the two men in question, Herman Santiago and Jimmy Merchant, waited 3 decades to file their lawsuit cast doubt on their legitimacy and eventually led to the original decision being reversed. Oof. A more famed legal action from 94 awarded contentious Beach Boy member Mike Love co-credit and royalties for numerous songs originally believed to be written solely by Brian Wilson, including the 1964 hit I Get Around. 94. I wonder if Montel Jordan, didn't he have a song called I Get Around that came out around 1994? Like, Mike Love notoriously just signs deals for Beach Boys crap and gets paid from it for other people to use their stuff, I think. Please look up, oh my God, if you're this kind of person like me and you love these kind of discussions, Pat Finnerty's What Makes This Song Stink podcast has an episode about I Get Around. It's a song, not the Beach Boys song, but they discuss how like Mike Love is making all the money off of this, and it's awful. It's an awful, awful new song. Oh, it's so gross. So despite testimony claiming Love's contribution to the works were minimal. I mean, if Brian Wilson wasn't just so nutty that he couldn't mount a good legal defense, I wonder how that would have went. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what Brian Wilson's legal team did in that case. I should find some books about that. I would love to. If you know, call in now. I've only got a few more minutes before I have to stop recording tonight and go to bed and work my day job in the morning. But let's see. The purchase of the Misfits catalog was a rather dicey gamble for Caroline Records. The company, despite cultivating such globally popular artists as Smashing Pumpkins and White Zombie, was now a huge conglomerate with piles of disposable income. Investing so much capital in the recordings of a band that hadn't existed in a decade seemed potentially disastrous on paper. Would anyone actually buy this music if they released it? A great deal of Caroline's profits for the following year were resting on the Misfits material and the company's ability to hawk it to an ostensibly punk-hungry public. Insiders quickly began considering their options. So here's the nitty-gritty details here. We mentioned in the timeline that like January 1st, 1995 was the day that the decision really comes into effect, right? Well, the day before that, December 31st, 1994, plaintiffs Gerald Caiafa, Paul Caiafa, Frank Licata, Julio Valverde, and defendant Glenn Danzig entered into a legal agreement regarding the music and rights of their former band, the Misfits. The terms of this settlement stipulated all members relinquish ownership of master recordings. That's not the compositions. That's not the publishing. It's just the tapes. The way they were recorded, and then they can, the raw tapes, so they can be mixed differently if you want to. But you, the musicians, don't get to own the physical property anymore, okay? We get to put them out. So Caroline Records gets that, and all future music royalties via Caroline Records or anyone else should be divided 60-40 in favor of the plaintiffs. Save the first $90,000 of post-settlement royalties, which go directly to the plaintiffs. All royalties earned prior were to be split 50-50. This document stipulates the plaintiffs and the defendant would co-own the Misfits name, trademark, and corresponding logos as they appeared on any and all product, including Walk Among Us, that neither party would have to account to the other for any revenues, and also agreed not to use the names, likenesses, or visual representations of other party members without full written consent. And this is a lot of lawyers talking to lawyers for the next 20 years is what this basically comes down to, and them not having to talk to each other ever again, which is probably for the best for everyone's emotional and psychological well-being. Let's see. The Misfits song publishing rights were to be owned exclusively by Danzig, and that no one party would be responsible for notifying the other should Caroline fail to do so concerning future artwork or sound mixes. Perhaps most importantly, though, the settlement decreed that the plaintiffs would own exclusive right to perform publicly and record as the Misfits, and that Danzig could not and would not receive payments from future performances or recordings. The plaintiffs also agreed to alert all concert promoters that Danzig was no longer a member of the band. Obviously, that had to have been updated and changed when the Misfits got back together with Danzig at Riot Fest in Chicago a few years back. And for every show they've played with I mean, maybe promoting it as the original Misfits or something like that in the posters was a sort of their way around it. I don't know. Even if I'm even remembering that right, maybe they weren't promoting it as the original Misfits. But let's see, because I wanted to talk about how the Misfits, Jerry Only and Doyle side, then took their money and split it up with the other guys, because it was a month after that. Caiaphas, Licata, and Valverde entered their own agreement that divvied up the settlement monies with a small portion to Ken Caiafa, the brother between Jerry and Doyle, who was nominated to manage whatever new incarnation the Misfits came to be. Some of the settlement money was set aside in a reserve clause for Joey Image and Bobby Steele, should they decide to claim it. After 2 years, said monies would revert to Doyle. The only Misfits featured on the disputed recordings who received nothing from the case were drummers Manny Martinez and Arthur Googie. It has been rumored over the years that both these men sought out Danzig individually for smaller compensation and were accommodated, which would have legally barred them from participating in the whole court case. This 1995 agreement also decreed all future royalties derived from Caroline Records' Misfits product would be prorated by instrument and track depending on the former. Thus, Jerry Only would only receive a full third of Collection 1 royalties, but the third set aside for the guitar tracks would be split between Frank Licata, Doyle, and Bobby Steele, as would the third for the drum tracks between Mr. Jim, Joey Image, Googie, and Robo. With this matter finally squared away, Jerry Only and Doyle focused on what the New York District Court now legally allowed them to do, reuniting the Misfits. So clearly, they basically made their best stab, at pushing hard to do the Misfits for the rest of their natural lives. They're both still alive, and they play shows with Danzig every now and then. I think they rightfully thought, look, our future is in performing and releasing new stuff more so than trying to, live off of the old stuff that we can't prove as much of a right to. And hard work Glenn Danzig did in that first decade of his musical career, I think he deserves that money, that Misfits money for what he did, and just living off of it. Doesn't matter if you don't like that guy or those other guys. If they don't own it, some other leech that never did anything to help them create any of this music was going to own it. That's how it goes. And I don't despise the Misfits music after Danzig. I really enjoyed a couple of songs like Dig Up Her Bones and Saturday Night and Forbidden Zone. And that's enough though for me, like 4 songs. I mean, I dig them. It's just fine. It's still stuff that came out, I think in the 90s, 95, 1999. I saw them play twice. And it was a lot of fun. I'm glad I did. I'm a lot happier that I saw them with Glenn Danzig at the White River Amphitheater in Washington State up here a couple of years ago, 3 summers ago. Amazing with AC Slade on guitar, backing up the Doyle's nonsense of just stomping around and hitting the whammy bar while AC played the actual chords. And then, the all-star thrash metal drummer Dave Lombardo playing for them. He's known as the guy from Slayer, but he's also the guy from, nowadays, Mr. Bungle. He's the guy that's done tons of stuff with members of various other bands. Like other Mike Patton, and he did something with Mike. He had a project with. Oh, there's Dead Cross, I think he plays on, and also another endeavor with King Buzzo from the Melvins and Mike Patton Fantomas, right, for a while. I'll stop speculating, but the man is a machine when he plays with the Misfits, unlike the way he played with Slayer when I saw him a few times. I think he's the most reckless and unpredictable drummer that I've seen with Slayer, and I think Paul Bostaph is more on it, but he doesn't have that flavor that Dave Lombardo has. And the openers were the Damned and the Distillers, and both were fantastic. I don't say that very often. I don't usually like an entire night's worth of bands that much. It was wonderful. It was such an amazing, energetic show with great songs and great performances all the way through. I was so happy to have seen the Misfits together just really dominating and doing a great fucking job. Certainly better than I saw the Danzig's band play at the Sky Church at EMP in Seattle when they were on the I Luciferi tour, or the 7. Yeah, Danzig 7, I Luciferi. Because Glenn sounded like Kermit the Frog. And I decided I'm not paying. I've seen Ozzy a few times with Sabbath and his own stuff, and half the times I saw him, his voice was garbage. And I was like, I'm not here to see Danzig sound like shit. Sorry. So if you hadn't had enough of an earful of my opinions about everyone concerned, I think that wraps up my conjecture quite nicely. And I think I do it for a couple of reasons. Partly to get all those thoughts out of my head and just make it okay that I went to some of those bad shows or good shows, and I can sort of mentally settle up and spew that out there. But also to qualify, I'm constantly qualifying my opinions and my level of reference and research and expertise for you, because I want you to know what my biases are, and I want you to know that I love this music. I don't have any reverence for the people involved. They've achieved things I can't achieve and never have and never will. And I can admire the work they put in, and I can admire the noises they created that made me so happy for so many years. And that's enough.
You got to remember, man, we learned this in the 20th century too when it comes to cultural values and aesthetics. It is a pendulum, and people get bored. And once we understand the mechanizations of something, we move on to something else. But the one thing that's undercurrent between both those things is it's all about storytelling. It's all about the story first. So in my mind, I don't actually have to release this comedy special. I actually have the option where I never release it, and I only show one person at a time, and then do podcast and discuss a comedy special no one else can watch, because really the only content that matters now in the industry's eyes are these podcasts. Yeah, like art should, art. It's okay for art to be challenging. It doesn't mean it has to be bullshit. You don't have to do a pale impression of David Lynch and excuse your bad art. Oh, it's weird because that's what makes it good. You're like, no, he still understands plot and structure, motherfucker.
Halloween was approaching, and the time was right. Jerry had decided that Doyle was in and Bobby was out. It was an obvious choice for Bobby's replacement. Doyle and I were 15 when he did his first show. It was at Irving Plaza, sometimes called Club 57 or the Monster Movie Club. This was Halloween. It had become tradition for Misfits to play here in New York City. What a way to start Doyle's career. They showed horror movie trailers before and in between the bands. There were lamb's heads hanging from the chandeliers and cobwebs everywhere. On the bill that night was the legendary blues shouter Screamin' Jay Hawkins and a transvestite band aptly named Marilyn. It was the first gig I ever went to, and it was cool as hell. The Misfits had 3 coffins standing behind the blood-red velvet curtain. They also had Arthur Googie, who had been in the band for a while now, behind the drum kit. This lineup was my favorite. As the show started, they kicked down the lids and went into Halloween. The rest was a blur. If you never saw them, a Misfits show was a wall of guitars and howling, screaming vocals. Totally intense and insane. There were piles of bodies all over the stage, people jumping off the PA stacks, and tons of stage diving. Jerry would count off every song, flail his bass around, and run and jump all over the stage. Doyle would punish his guitar and scare the hell out of people. Glenn would sometimes lose his mind and be found crawling around on the floor or crouching way down close to the crowd. He'd even get kicked in the head. He would jump on people and maybe even throw a punch or two. It was insanity. I loved it. Those are just a few of the notes penned by Erie Vaughn that appeared in 4 pages of the liner notes of the Misfits box set when it came out. You can read all of them at misfitscentral.com. There's only one other quote I wanted to read before I wrap up this Misfits episode. I wish I could have done more, but I feel like by James Green Jr. and spend some more time at misfitscentral.com if you want to know more than what I've already covered. Now, way back when the Bullet single was released by Misfits, around the time the Misfits had changed the name of their label from Blank to Plan 9, if you haven't noticed, a tribute to the Ed Wood horror movie Plan 9 from Outer Space, starring Vampira. And the last footage of Bela Lugosi ever, as well as a neighborhood chiropractor that looked enough like Bela Lugosi when he put a cape in front of his face to play the part of Bela's vampire character. Ghoul, rather, not a vampire. How foolish of me. As well as pro wrestler Tor Johnson. By the way, if you haven't seen any of Drew Friedman's Tor Johnson black and white comic strips from back in the day, do yourself a favor, check those out. The world of Ed Wood is a rich and a passionate one, and hopefully I'll be able to get into his stuff somehow on this show someday. I don't know how, though. Maybe the Valiant Years.
That's kind of why I edited the special the way I did. I made it, I was like, what would Ed Wood, just fucking Ed Wood this. Fuck it. Let's have fun.
Back to the Bullet release. It was sent to a lot of punk-friendly magazines and got a lot of enthusiastic reviews and good notes. Very notably, notes by Claude Kickboy Face Bessie from Slash Magazine, who said the single was lethal and truly inspiring. This is the stuff that Dead Boys and other puppets wish they were made of. Dipshits beware. This music leaves stains on well-balanced brains. Good night, friends. Happy Halloween if it is Halloween. Happy October if it is October. Happy fall, autumn, winter, whenever it is you're listening to this. Don't treat yourself like shit any more than you have to. But I do recognize that sometimes you have to. Rock and roll is the best. So were you.
Please remember to replace the speaker on the post when you leave the theater.